Chapter 1003. Clang. The familiar muffled sound rang out again. Serene felt as though he had crashed into a mountain. He was actually pushed back more than 10 meters. The Death Knight's strength was extremely high, and it had also activated the Legion Charge skill. Using this skill to counter Serene's normal attack, it naturally had a great advantage. Serene felt a little troubled. He had already seen through Bai Xiaowen's tactic. The zombie monster that he had just replaced charged towards the other areas of the battlefield. However, that zombie monster was the same as him. They both had the skill to recover their health points after killing the enemy. With Serene's eyesight, he could naturally see that Fatty's health points were slowly recovering even though he was in the middle of a fierce battle. It was simply shameless. As for the armored wolf that had first blocked his attack, it was now circling around the battle circle between him and the Death Knight with ill intentions. It was obviously waiting for it to rest enough before charging again. In other words, this human prophet Dior's tactic was to use these three troublesome summoned creatures to stall him, the Lord. As a lord who specialized in spirit, the human prophet Dior only needed to activate the wisdom halo to support his allies. As a lord who specialized in physique, if he could not enter the battlefield and restrict the opponent on the front lines, his presence would be greatly reduced. Serene glanced at the other areas of the battlefield. Although the Naga warriors were elites, under the dual restrictions of the wisdom halo and soul rhythm, they were also retreating. Moreover, the human prophet Dior's sister, Charlotte, was also very powerful. Her ghostly movement speed and her storm-like dual swords. Her ability to continuously deal damage was extremely strong. Serene's heart sank. If this continued, not only would they not be able to catch the human prophet, but they would also have the possibility of losing. Blow the horn! Serene shouted loudly. A Naga general at the rear was slightly startled when he heard Serene's order. However, he still took out a bone horn and blew it. A rumbling sound was heard. At the east, west, and south side of the square, strange machines drove out from each of the streets. They looked like armored tanks. There were 3 mechanical tanks. One was silver, one was crimson, and one was pure black. The surface of the machines had a cold, hard metallic luster. There were also complicated magic patterns engraved on them, emitting a faint light. On the 3 mechanical tanks, there was a cockpit made of glass. In each cockpit sat a Naga. The 3 Naga drivers had very deformed bodies. Their heads were extremely large and their torsos were extremely thin. They looked like malnourished bean sprouts. The 3 Nagas did not have any hair. Their big bald heads did not have any skulls. Instead, there was a thin layer of slightly transparent flesh-colored membrane. The crisscrossing gullies of the brain could be faintly seen, and they were even wriggling slightly. It looked very terrifying. Weren't we supposed to be in charge of the ambush to prevent the human prophet from escaping? Stupid Lucian. It must be that Lord Sean can't defeat the other party, so he sent us to save the situation. The deformed Naga on the red mechanical chariot cursed. Who are you calling stupid, you short-sighted dwarf? Enough, the deformed Naga on the pure black tank said coldly. Prepare for battle. The voices of the 3 Nagas were transmitted through the mechanical tank's loudspeaker. It sounded a little distorted. The moment the 3 Nagas appeared, Bai Xiaowen received a special notification from a Spirit World rule. S-rank Special Hero Side Mission, Scavenger Missions branch target has appeared. Please kill the Naga magic craftsman Lucian, Glop, and Asmonti as soon as possible. Bai Xiaowen was slightly shocked. The Spirit World's rules were really concerned about these 3 anomalies. Bai Xiaowen immediately used insight on the 3 Naga magic craftsmen from afar. The information he received was very surprising. The 3 Naga magic craftsmen were very weak. They were only elites. Especially in terms of physical fitness, they were very weak. As level 10 elites, their strength, agility, and constitution attributes were only in the single digits. Any one of the skeleton soldiers could kill these 3 fellows. However, there were gains and losses. The 3 Naga magic craftsmen all had very high spirit points. None of them was lower than 120 points. They were almost on par with Bai Xiaowen, a spirit lord. Bai Xiaowen carefully looked at the information of the three Nagas' skills. They were a little similar to Hierophant's the Watcher. Or, they were even more extreme. The three elite Naga magic craftsmen had three skills that were actually research abilities. They had nothing to do with combat. For example, the skill Curse Sense could accurately sense magic energy and use mental power to guide the magic energy to draw runes. If it was a fierce battle, how could there be time to draw runes? They are all research talents. Zombie Doctor might like these three partners. Bai Xiaowen silently said in his heart, Delifa, these three are elites. They are rare researchers. After killing them, try to collect their complete souls. Master, it's usually up to the Black Spirit Stone to collect the complete soul of a researcher. Although I can do it, it's not as good as the Black Spirit Stones, and it requires a certain amount of soul essence, Delifer said with a bit of difficulty. Okay, I allow you to do so, Bai Xiaowen said in a low voice. If the Black Soul Stone did not want to work on its own, then Delifa would do it. At this point, Bai Xiaowen suddenly felt a sense of danger. He immediately moved to the side. The next second, a pure white ray condensed with ice flowers almost brushed past his body. Half of Bai Xiaowen's body went numb. He felt like he was frozen. Not only did his movement speed decrease by 1/3, but he also received nearly 100 points of frost damage. This frost ray was not a single target skill. It had a penetrating effect on the entire line, regardless of friend or foe. Bai Xiaowen clearly saw that in the path of the frost ray, whether it was the Naga or the Freikorps soldiers, they were frozen in their original positions. They were almost frozen into ice sculptures. There were even soldiers with low HP whose bodies had turned into ice sculptures that directly exploded and died. Bai Xiaowen looked at the origin of the frost ray. He saw a big-headed Naga magic craftsman sitting in the silver-white mechanical war chariot. Through the insight just now, Bai Xiaowen knew that his name was Lucian. At this moment, Lucian was patting the console regretfully and yelling, "Damn it, I almost hit it." Bai Xiaowen's pupils contracted slightly. He had already seen the power of this frost ray. It was not a direct hit. In less than a second, it had caused nearly 100 points of frost damage, actual damage. However, compared to the power, the distance was more frightening. Bai Xiaowen and Lucian's war chariot were separated by more than half of the battlefield, nearly 2,000 meters. Chapter 1004. A casting distance of 2,000 meters wasn't too exaggerated, but this 2,000-meter ballistic AoE would cause damage and slow down to all targets in its path. This was very shocking. Although the rules of the spiritual realm weren't absolutely fair and wouldn't deliberately balance the strength of the Awakened, there was still some balance when it came to individual skills. Generally speaking, for a skill that had both damage and control, if the control effect was very strong, then the damage bonus coefficient wouldn't be too high. If the damage was exaggerated, then the casting distance wouldn't be too long. If the casting distance was very far, then it was very likely that the power of the skill would decrease as the distance increased. Lucian's Frost Ray just now had an extremely long casting distance and didn't have any reduction in power. Its damage was very high, and it also had a heavy slowing effect. It was simply a bug. Fortunately, there was still the problem of not being able to distinguish between friend and foe. If he could still distinguish between friend and foe, then he would be able to fire frost rays without restraint. That would be too heaven-defying. Bai Xiaowen continued to delay the Serene Lord while focusing part of his energy on the three Naga magic craftsmen. After this frost ray, Lucian laughed heartily and slapped the control panel. The silver-white mechanical war chariot let out a beeping sound. At the street where Lucian was, a group of elite Nagas wearing silver-white armor rushed out. The weapons these Nagas held were very strange. They looked like silver-white guns. The caliber of the silver-white guns was relatively large, and they were simply small hand cannons. The elite Nagas had to use both hands to hold them. Then, the elite Nagas opened fire. The silver-white hand cannons spat out ice balls overflowing with cold air. They landed in the crowd and exploded. A layer of frost immediately formed on the ground. Everyone who was hit by the ice balls, regardless of friend or foe, would be damaged by the frost and slowed down. Ahaha! Continue to bombard. The Naga magic craftsman, Lucian, suddenly stretched out a skinny finger and tapped his forehead. Following a disgusting squirming in his cerebral cortex, a large amount of mental strength gathered and sketched out a miniature magic incantation in the air. Following Lucian's movements, the miniature magic incantation was imprinted on the control panel in front of him. Buzz! The silver-white mechanical war chariot hummed. A large silver-white crystal was embedded in the front, and its surface flickered with light. Careful! Bai Xiaowen only had time to say this. In the next second, the terrifying frost ray was fired once again. It pierced through the battlefield once again. On the other hand, the newly appeared group of snake people cannoneers with frost hand cannons launched frost balls one after another, causing many areas on the battlefield to be frozen. The slowed warriors, regardless of whether they were from the Naga camp or the Free Corps, were unable to dodge. This time, the frost ray took the lives of hundreds of soldiers. Most of them were Free Corps, and only a few unlucky Nagas were buried with them. This was also very normal. Although the frost ray did not distinguish between friend and foe, Lucian, who was controlling it, could freely choose the direction of the ray. Of course, he would choose the path with the least allies and the most enemies to cast it. Moreover, the silver-white armor of the Naga cannoneers seemed to have a very high frost resistance. Even if someone was grazed by the frost ray, they would continue to advance and fire as if nothing had happened. I have to stop these three guys as soon as possible, Bai Xiaowen glanced around. The other two Naga magic craftsmen did not participate in the battle. Perhaps they felt that Lucian alone was enough. Bai Xiaowen waved his arm, and the Wrath Claw gave up on attacking the Shuren and quickly pounced towards Lucian. Along the way, some Naga warriors tried to stop him, but the Wrath Claw relied on its large size to push them aside with one or two claws. Its speed did not decrease at all. Dong dong dong, the group of silver-white armored Naga cannoneers welcomed the Wrath Claw and fired frost balls one after another. The Wrath Claw nimbly dodged most of the frost balls, but due to its large size, it was unable to dodge all of them. Inevitably, its speed was reduced. Moreover, after the frost balls exploded, an area of shattered ice formed around the Wrath Claw. Hee! You beast, don't even think of getting close to me. Lucian let out a strange laugh, and the third frost ray was shot. The target was Wrath Claw. However, the rune armor on the Wrath Claw's body flickered and a layer of solid shield covered its body. Most of the damage from the frost ray was absorbed by the shield. In the distance, the necromancer cast Yellow Sky and quickly dispelled the slowing effect of the Wrath Claw. It suddenly increased its speed and charged. The elite Naga cannoneers were knocked to the ground. The Wrath Claw did not linger and rushed towards Lucian's silver chariot and swiped with its claw. The silver chariot shook. Lucian, the Naga magic craftsman sitting inside, finally showed a trace of panic in his voice. Quick, you two, come and help me. We can't help you. The voices of the other two chariots sounded from the loudspeakers. Lucian's mechanical chariot clearly had a certain level of durability. The Wrath Claw's attacks landed on the chariot and slowly reduced its durability. They could only attack Lucian's body when the durability reached 0. However, with his single-digit vitality, his body was definitely very weak. Lucian saw that he could not count on his two companions and could only drive the chariot in an attempt to escape the Wrath Claw's pursuit. However, the speed of his chariot could not compare to the agility of the Wrath Claw. The latter could easily intercept him and swipe at him with its claws. Fortunately, the Naga cannoneers were scolded by Lucian and came over to help. The frost balls did not have much effect on the Wrath Claw, but they could still cause some trouble and delay the destruction of Lucian's chariot. However, on the opposite Crimson Mechanical War chariot, the other Naga magic craftsman, Grope, had already made his move. Bai Xiaowen could clearly feel that there was a large amount of mental strength gathering between Grope's eyebrows. He was also drawing a miniature magic incantation in the air. The magic incantation was imprinted on the control panel in front of him. The red crystals embedded in the front of the crimson mechanical chariot flashed and gathered together. Boom! A blazing beam of fire shot out. Compared to Lucian's frost ray, the fire ray did not have any additional control effects. Its damage was also average, but it had a burning effect. The soldiers who were hit by the fire ray all turned into people on fire. They ran wildly on the battlefield and screamed. The soldiers with weaker constitutions or low HP were directly burned into charcoal. The soldiers with stronger vitality could still endure the residual heat of the fire ray. However, after the flames on their bodies were extinguished, they would enter a heavily injured state and their combat strength would be greatly reduced. What was worse was that after Grop's fire ray showed its power, another batch of elite Nagas rushed out from behind the crimson mechanical chariot he was driving. Chapter 1005. This group of elite Nagas wore fiery red battle armor and held strange weapons in their hands that looked like flamethrowers. As expected, when these red-armored Nagas approached the battlefield, they immediately spat out large balls of flames and roasted the people in front of them. Similarly, they did not differentiate between friend and foe. Phew, Bai Xiaowen exhaled and immediately controlled the Death Knight that was fighting with Shuren to gallop towards the Naga magical craftsman Glop. You dare to ignore me? Shuren snorted and waved his meat-cleaving axe as he charged towards Bai Xiaowen. You're wrong. I don't dare to ignore a lord. Bai Xiaowen sighed. Footsteps could be heard and the ground shook slightly. The butcher had already charged out of the crowd, his body covered in purplish-black fog. He once again blocked in front of Bai Xiaowen and intercepted Shuren. Damn it, if I wasn't restricted by this human prophet's halo, this stupid zombie monster wouldn't have been able to stop me. And that despicable flute sound. Shuren was extremely angry. Whether it was the Wrath Claw, the Death Knight, or the Butcher, these three summoned creatures of Bai Xiaowen were all able to hold him back and prevent him from using his strengths. This made Shuren feel a sense of helplessness. Let's not talk about this side. The Death Knight brandished his lance and charged towards Glop. Block it! Glop roared angrily and began to prepare a second fire beam. The group of Nagas holding flamethrowers in front stood in a row after receiving the order and shot flames forward, forming a large curtain of fire. Thud thud thud, the sound of horse hooves rang out like raindrops. The red-armored Nagas saw in horror that the Death Knight was enveloped in a layer of bloody light. Smoke billowed from his body as he charged forward. The raging flames could not stop him at all. Bam! The powerful impact caused two red-armored Nagas to spit out blood and fly backwards. The Death Knight charged in front of Glop's mechanical chariot and drew a powerful arc with his lance. Glop's red mechanical chariot was almost overturned. The fire ray that was in preparation could not be launched because the incantation was not completed. In the middle of the square, Shuren, who was fighting with Butcher, sneered and said, "Human prophet, you're quite impressive. You can actually restrict the movements of two magic craftsmen. However, the Great Lord has a total of 3 great craftsmen under his command. Now, there's only Asmonti left. Let's see what you're going to do." After Lucian and Glop were restrained, Asmont, the Snake Man magic craftsman in the last pure black chariot, also began to move. Bai Xiaowen also felt the heavy pressure. As expected, it's still too much to rely on Freikorps and 3 temporary leaders to deal with the well-prepared Naga base camp. Bai Xiaowen shook his head and touched a contract with his fingertips. See grade gold item, Call of the North. Do I really have to use up glorious summoning here? Suddenly, Bai Xiaowen sensed something and turned to the north. There, a dozen powerful auras were rapidly approaching. These auras were all at the leader level, and the most powerful one was definitely not weaker than him or Shuren. It had to be at the leader level. The Snake Man magic craftsman Asmont's movements also paused, and he looked to the north in confusion. Obviously, he, who had extremely high spiritual power, also felt the powerful auras approaching. Shuren also felt the powerful auras approaching, and his movements also slowed down. Could it be reinforcements from the Guardian camp? Shirin, Asmont, and the others all had such thoughts. However, Bai Xiaowen frowned slightly. He knew very well that the people coming could not be Ahan and the others, so it could only be Snake Mother. She's actually here too. Captain, what should we do? Qiao Rui's voice sounded in the team channel. From the fact that our surprise attack was seen through by the enemy, Snake Mother should be pretending to cooperate with us, luring us to come here to die. Yeah, this way, we have even less of a chance of winning. Xiaowen, use the scroll. Pull Gloria over to save the situation. Li Shi said. The corners of Bai Xiaowen's mouth curled up, and he revealed a handsome smile. No, my thoughts are a little different from yours. At the northern street entrance, the dozen or so powerful auras finally appeared. Just as the White Phoenix team expected, the newcomers were Snake Mother Galilala and the dozen or so leader-level snake women under her command. Galilala. Why did you come back? Tyrannical Overlord Shirin roared, your mission is to feign an attack. Cover His Excellency the Great Lord's sneak attack on the ley line corridor and completely flood the moat mining area. Enough, Shirin. At this point, you should understand. Snake Mother Galilala snorted. You and His Excellency the Great Lord should have guessed that I cooperated with the Guardian camp, right? You actually used me to pass false information to Prophet Dior. What a good plan to kill two birds with one stone. I really underestimated you. Snake Mother's words seemed to be directed at Shirin, but in fact, she was also directed at Bai Xiaowen. Bai Xiaowen nodded slightly. He completely understood. For this battle, the Snake people had prepared two plans. The surface plan was to send Snake Mother to feign an attack on the human strategic location. Then, the Great Lord would lead the Shirin overlords and various tribal elites to secretly attack the ley line corridor of the Dwarf Kingdom. This was also the part that Snake Mother knew. The real plan was that the Great Lord would lead a group of tribal elites to set off, while the Shirin overlords would lead a large number of elites to stay in the base and wait for the human prophet Dior to walk into the trap. This was something that Snake Mother could not know in advance. It should be because Snake Mother had given up on Monitor Harafenson in the Galgulch Highlands, causing her status in the Abyss camp to drop. She was suspected by the Great Lord and the Shirin overlords. The two strategic plans prepared this time were also to test Snake Mother's loyalty. When Bai Xiaowen and the others appeared in the base and launched a surprise attack, the suspicions of the Great Lord, Lord Shan, and the others had already been confirmed. That was, the mother of snakes, Gaglila, had indeed betrayed them, and reported the movements of the camp to the human prophet. In other words, Galilala had no way out. She had to make a choice and rush over to rescue Bai Xiaowen. Even if she did not make a move, after the battle ended, the snake people's upper echelons would launch a purge against her. Since that was the case, she might as well stake it all on Bai Xiaowen. Galilala, how dare you betray the Great Lord? The Great Lord will rush back soon, and you and your tribe will face destruction. The Shirin overlord shouted. It's not too late to turn back now. Help me. Use your petrification ability to capture the human prophet and atone for your sins. Chapter 1006. In the face of the Shirin overlord's threatening persuasion, Snake Mother Kaglila did not say anything. She only sneered and shook her head. You are crazy. You are ruining your tribe's last chance of survival, Shirin said through gritted teeth with his eyes wide open. Bai Xiaowen smiled and said, Shirin overlord, you are too naive. Lady Kaglila gave up on the mission of feigning attack and returned to the base. To the Great Lord, this is an act of disobedience. She must have thought it through carefully before taking action. Do you expect a few threats to make the leader of a tribe change her mind? Seeing Bai Xiaowen speak, Kaglila gave him face and added, my spies under the Great Lord's command reported that the Great Lord did not return after receiving the warning from the base. Instead, he sped up along the secret passage toward the great mine of Moat. So, Sir Shirin, you have been abandoned. Impossible. Shirin's eyes were about to pop out. I am of great value to the Great Lord. Ha, no matter how great your value is, how can it compare to 3 magic craftsmen? Kaglila sneered and said, "The three magic craftsmen are the survivors of hundreds of experimental subjects. It is extremely difficult to modify them. Without them, the Great Lord's magic crystal cannon production will come to a standstill. However, the Great Lord can even give up on these three people. What is so important about you, a mere lord with a modified body? As long as the Great Lord succeeds and sinks the great mine of Moat, not only will he be able to occupy the rich resources in the mining area, but he will also have the geographical advantage and annihilate the elite forces of the allied forces that have fallen into the sea. At that time, he will be able to create as many magic crystal cannons as he wants and as many powerful deep-sea Nagas as he wants." Bai Xiaowen smiled and said, "The Great Lord did not return because he overestimated the battle power of Sir Shuren and the three great craftsmen and underestimated the battle power of our army. On the other hand, he probably did not expect Lady Kaglila to return so decisively and assist me in the battle. As a result, the base is in danger of being destroyed." Shuren's heart grew colder and colder as he listened to the two. "Duong." Shuren's giant axe suddenly fell to the ground as he roared, "Shut up, you two despicable and shameless fellows. I don't want to listen to your lies anymore. Also, don't think that victory is already in your grasp. Charge! Kill them all." The last two sentences were an order to his subordinates and the three magic craftsmen. However, Shuren's subordinates had also heard Bai Xiaowen and Snake Dowager's words, and their morale had plummeted. These Nagas were basically all converted races, so there was no racial cohesion to speak of. They were all gathered together because of their reverence for the Great Lord. Under the threat of life and death, the first thing they would think about after transforming into a Naga was how to save their own lives. They did not have any sense of mission such as the master consciousness of dying together with the enemy. The battle continued. One of the snake matriarch's subordinates, a strength-type snake woman named Dorsa, was blocking the last snake mage craftsman, Asmont. Asmont's multiple arms were waving about, and the durability of the pure black mechanical chariot he was driving was rapidly decreasing. As for the group of black-armored snake men that followed Asmonti, they were also armed with hand cannons and other weapons that could shoot out a type of black death ray. However, they were facing more than a dozen commander-level experts. The snake woman leaders forcibly endured the power of the death ray and charged forward. They were scattered among the black-armored snake men. Their 6 arms each wielded a weapon and slashed at the black-armored snake men, causing them to howl like ghosts and howl like wolves. Snake Dowager Galilala charged into the main battlefield. Her long greenish-black hair fluttered in the wind, and a ring of psionic waves spread out. A powerful pressure enveloped the entire battlefield. Petrification Halo. Within the halo's range, the attack speed and movement speed of all enemies would be continuously reduced to a maximum of 75% of their original speed. Actively activating the petrification halo would continuously consume mental strength, but it would cause the attack speed and movement speed of the petrification halo to be reduced by an astonishing 50%. In other words, it was halved. What was even more ridiculous was that when the enemy within the petrification halo was slowed to the peak, 50%, they would enter a petrified state. It was equivalent to being stunned and unable to move for up to 3 seconds. Although the original speed reduction effect would be removed after the petrification duration ended, just these 3 seconds of petrification was already enough to kill. Similar to the brutal Overlord Shuren, this was a large-scale control halo. Compared to Bai Xiaowen's Wisdom Halo, each had its own merits. The Wisdom Halo was equivalent to a soft control. In terms of restricting the enemy's strength, it could not compare to the 2 Overlord Halos. However, it was a passive buff for teammates, which was also quite practical. Bai Xiaowen sighed inwardly. Overlords really had a decisive influence on battles of less than 10,000 people. In battles of this scale, the Overlord's halo could almost cover half of the battlefield. Whether it was a buff for allies or a restriction for enemies, it was enough to change the situation of the battle. With the support of the Snake Dowager, the scales of victory gradually tilted toward Bai Xiaowen's side. Bai Xiaowen immediately activated his backup plan. He gave Delifa Berserk talismans with symbiotic spirit and then cast Corpse Revival on her. Batches of skeleton soldiers crawled out of the corpses. Delifa's mental strength also exceeded 120 points under the symbiotic spirit buff. These revived skeleton soldiers could move for more than 2 minutes. The operation time was not considered long in the overall battle, but it was enough for the skeleton soldiers to rush to the front lines in batches to die. Oh no, to exchange their lives with the enemy. At the cost of their own destruction, they would exchange their lives for the enemy's. Then, Delifa's corpse would be revived and the enemy's corpse would be revived. Using battle to support battle, this kind of snowball method was simply fatal. The Nagas under Shuren's command finally showed signs of defeat. It was as if cracks had appeared on a sturdy dam, and then it was out of control. First, the Nagas scattered and scattered. Then, groups of deserters appeared. Except for a few diehards who were unwilling to surrender, most of the Nagas either chose to flee the square or simply put down their weapons and kneel and surrender when faced with a certain defeat. After the durability of the mechanical chariot driven by the 3 Naga magic craftsmen reached 0, they were directly dragged out. The Snake Dowager thought that Bai Xiaowen would interrogate them, but she did not expect Bai Xiaowen to directly execute them. The 3 Naga magic craftsmen with huge deformed heads were all blown up. The Black Soul Stone did not take the initiative to absorb the complete souls of the 3 people. It only absorbed the soul essence of the 3 people based on their elite templates. However, after Delifa noticed this, she immediately began to consume the soul essence to guide the souls of the 3 people, trying her best to preserve their complete consciousness. Bai Xiaowen did not care about the specific operation. He commanded the summoned creatures, the Wrath Claw, the Death Knight, and the Butcher to surround Shuren and take turns tanking him. As long as they paid attention to not have any targets with low HP within Shuren's melee range, it would be fine. This was equivalent to wasting one of Shuren's key recovery skills. Chapter 1007. Your Excellency Prophet, do you need help? Snake Mother Jiglila came to Bai Xiaowen's side with a charming smile. Looking at the Butcher, Wrath Claw, and the Death Knight taking turns to attack the tyrannical Lord Shuren, Bai Xiaowen noticed that he only had 1/3 of his HP left. After spending so much effort, of course, Bai Xiaowen wanted to increase his battle contribution as much as possible. Moreover, the Great Lord would not return to help. This gave Bai Xiaowen plenty of time to control Shuren. He declined politely, "No need, Miss Jiglila. I can handle it." "Alright, but I have to remind your Excellency Prophet that although the Great Lord will not return, we shouldn't stay here for too long," Snake Mother said. "To be honest, I doubt the ability of the mainland's allied forces. I'm afraid they won't be able to stop the Great Lord. If the Great Lord succeeds, more than half of the Dwarf Kingdom will become a vast ocean. Most of the elite forces of the allied forces will be submerged at the bottom of the sea." Bai Xiaowen nodded. Snake Mother's words made sense. Snake Mother's contempt for the mainland's allied forces was reasonable. Before Bai Xiaowen came, the mainland's countries did not have any good countermeasures against the invasion of the Nagas. It was understandable. At this time, Shuren's heavy armor had many cracks and his additional armor had been depleted. However, as a construction-type lord, the innate armor and magic resistance brought by 132 points of vitality were still as solid as a rock. With this level of defense, it was impossible to kill him with 1 or 2 grassland-style ancient martial arts moves. There was only one word to describe it: grind. Since the beginning of the battle, Bai Xiaowen had been grinding Shuren's HP down. Now, he had finally reduced his HP to less than 1/3. He saw a glimmer of hope. However, the slap to the face came so quickly. After his HP was reduced to 1/3, Shuren suddenly roared. The muscles all over his body swelled, and a dense red blood mist enveloped his body. With this layer of blood mist, Shuren's HP quickly recovered. 35, 45, 60 soon, Shuren's HP recovered to 90. The dense blood mist slowly dissipated. Spiritual Realm Rule Notification: Tyrannical Lord Shuren's special skill, Bloodthirst, has been activated. Based on your talent, Insight, you have received the corresponding information. Special skill, Bloodthirst. When Shuren deals damage to the enemy, he will accumulate HP. When his blood chi reached 100 points, Shan could release all of his stored blood chi at once to restore a maximum of 60 HP for himself. After many years of hard battles, Battle Shuren's HP, Bai Xiaowen was dumbfounded. Isn't this a little bit too shameless? It seemed that there was no way to kill Shan with the tactic of grinding him down. As a lord who specialized in physique, Shan didn't have the explosive power of a strength lord, nor did he have the ghostly speed and continuous output of an agility lord. He couldn't compare to the powerful spells of a spirit lord, but he had an almost unbeatable survival ability. Of course, that was if it was a one-on-one fight. Fortunately, this was not a fair duel. The Snake Mother led her team to chase after the fleeing enemy. The 4 members of the White Phoenix team gathered and began to gang up on Shuren. While dealing damage, they had to be careful not to let Shuren deal too much damage. According to the special skill information collected by Insight, the higher the damage Shuren dealt, the faster his HP would accumulate. When his HP reached 100 points, he quickly recovered another 60 points of HP. Fortunately, the White Phoenix team had a thorough understanding of Shuren's skills. It was not difficult to prevent Shuren from recovering HP. After Li Shi and Cecilia joined the 2 damage dealers, Shuren's HP decreased much faster than before. 807050/ Li Shi's sword pierced Shuren's heart, taking away his last 10 HP. Due to the avoidance of the 4 members of the White Phoenix team, Shuren did not manage to accumulate 100 HP until he died. He also did not find an effective target to use the slaughter skill to recover his HP. I don't want to die. With a bang, Shuren fell to the ground with a heavy sense of unwillingness. A dark gold treasure chest appeared above his corpse. At the same time, a ferocious-looking giant axe appeared, flickering with a faint blood-red light. Does this mean the holy relic was dropped? Li Shi asked curiously. Bai Xiaowen was a little disappointed. He said, I originally thought that the meat cleaver axe would be dropped in Shuren's treasure chest in the form of a special item guaranteed drop. This way, we can still take it out of the Dark Tide Bitwall. I didn't expect it to be this way. It didn't even enter the treasure chest. The rules of the spiritual realm will not allow us to take away the holy relic. Qiao Rui said calmly, look at how Captain's strength increased greatly after he was recognized by the holy relic. You can see how overpowered the holy relic is. Well, you are right. Bai Xiaowen sighed and put the treasure chest into his storage space. Then, he picked up the meat cleaver axe. With this, we have finally gathered all 7 holy relic. According to the inscriptions in the temple, as long as the 7 holy relic recognize a master, one can defeat Amitabha. But I don't know if it will work on the mysterious consciousness of the great lord who is possessing Amitabha. Bai Xiaowen then commanded the Free Corps to completely destroy the undersea base, especially the production equipment of the magic crystal cannons. After destroying the production equipment of the magic crystal cannons, Bai Xiaowen heaved a sigh of relief. Now that the source of the magic crystal cannons was destroyed, and the 3 magic craftsmen had become guests in the Black Soul Stone, one of the steps of the scavenger mission was basically completed. The magic crystal cannons that had not been destroyed were divided into 2 parts. A small part was mounted on the Free Corps ghost ships controlled by Bai Xiaowen. They could be destroyed when the war ended. Most of them were on the main fleet of the Nagas led by the Great Lord. They needed to defeat the Great Lord and capture the enemy ships before they could be destroyed. Snake Mother Kalilala looked at the undersea base that had turned into ruins and felt a little emotional. She looked at Shuren's corpse on the ground and said, Shuren used to be a rather famous bounty hunter in the Camello Kingdom. He took the initiative to seek refuge with the Great Lord. I'm afraid you won't be able to guess the reason. I can guess some of it. Bai Xiaowen thought for a moment. Is it related to this holy relic? As he spoke, he waved the meat cleaver axe in his hand, Akali's wrath. That's right. Shuren was unable to obtain the recognition of the holy relic. He was very unwilling, so he sought refuge with the Great Lord and begged the Great Lord to bestow him with great power. In the end, he achieved his goal, Kalilala said. Chapter 1008. Before the Naga's underwater base was destroyed, a die-hard loyalist reported the Snake Dowager's betrayal to the Great Lord through a magic communication rune. Neither the White Phoenix team nor the Snake Dowager herself could stop him in time. The Snake Dowager's exposure was a foregone conclusion. Of course, it did not matter. From the Great Lord and the Shuren Lord's initial two-tiered battle plan to hide their true intentions from the Snake Dowager, it was obvious that she was no longer trusted. Taking a step back, a few of the Nagas who escaped from the underwater base would definitely be able to escape to the Great Lord's side. The Great Lord would find out about the Snake Dowager's betrayal sooner or later. Therefore, the Snake Dowager no longer hid it and returned on Bai Xiaowen's flagship. Bai Xiaowen looked at the Medusa and the dozen or so Medusa leaders around her and asked curiously, "Madame Jaglila, the original Medusa that you command, sorry for using this term, but I'm calling you the Quagmire Medusa tribe, has quite a number of tribes, right? It can't be just leader-level powerhouses like you. Where's the Quagmire Naga army?" The Snake Dowager smiled. "Sorry, I don't think the advantage of numbers will be of much use against the Great Lord. If the Great Lord is a creature that can be ganged up on and beaten to death, then the large number of the Guardian Camp's allied forces is enough. They don't lack the manpower of my tribe. So I let my tribe scatter and live in seclusion until the situation of the war is clear." The Snake Dowager did not hide her pessimistic view of the allied forces. "If the Great Lord wins, the continent will eventually sink. My tribe can only live in seclusion, spread out, and live in seclusion forever. If we're lucky and the allied forces defeat the Great Lord, I can inform my tribe and let them see the light of day again." Bai Xiaowen's heart skipped a beat. "You're so confident that the Great Lord won't find your tribe?" The Snake Dowager smiled. "Of course, other than me and my family, no one can find them." Bai Xiaowen nodded slightly and did not speak. He already understood that the Quagmire Naga tribe led by the Snake Dowager was hiding in a different dimension through a space isolation array. Back in the treasure land of the Dead Soul Lake, Bai Xiaowen found a way to enter the internal space array through the Lobster Prophet Magic's remains after his death. It seemed that the Naga tribe in the core area of the treasure land of the Dead Soul Lake was a branch left by the previous Snake Dowager in the previous reincarnation, has nothing to do with the current Dowager, right? Bai Xiaowen thought guiltily. After this battle, the White Phoenix battle team, the Freedom Army, and the experts under Snake Dowager were all quite tired. After a brief discussion, they all went to rest. The White Phoenix team, on the other hand, was in the flagship's control room. They closed the door and began their joyous journey of drawing cards from treasure chests. Loot. There were not many Naga leaders that were. There were only a few leaders who stayed, and there were not many Naga leaders. 2. That was. Nor did treasure. Norse have. After the treasure chests were opened, the number would probably double. Bai Xiaowen's Black Soul Stone. Its growth rate soared again. It was now level 7, 3320100000. As for the soul essence, part of it was used to preserve the complete soul consciousness of the 3 Naga magic craftsmen. Previously, Bai Xiaowen used 450 points to light up the Terror Knight on the 5th level of the enhancement scroll. Even so, he still had more than 3,000 soul essence left. The battle was imminent. Bai Xiaowen did not hold back anymore. He directly lit up the 7th level. He had thought about the 2 Yangs. Enhancement Yang 1, increase the number of your skeleton warriors, skeleton swords and shields, by 4, all attributes by 4. Enhancement Yang 2, increase the number of your Terror Knights by 2, all attributes by 6. Each of these 2 Yangs was worth 1,500 soul essence. The number of soul essence was enough. The reason why there were only 2 Yangs and not the Vampire Lord or Lich was because Bai Xiaowen's team did not lack agility type and spirit type leaders. There was no need to talk about the Terror Knights. Including these 2, there were a total of 3 Terror Knights. they could enjoy the Death Knight's charge bonus. They were the elite force for frontal attacks. Yang Jianliang had strengthened the skeleton swordsman. Currently, he had 10 skeletons, including 6 skeleton swordsmen and 4 normal skeleton warriors. All attributes +4, in addition to the previous 2 all attributes +2 enhancements, every skeleton warrior had an all attributes +8. In addition, Bai Xiaowen's spirit type bonus and the shaman's bonus were taken into account. The combat power of these 10 skeleton warriors was quite impressive. They were almost at the level of elites. They were no longer ordinary cannon fodder. They were considered high-level cannon fodder. If a melee leader's attack did not hit a vital point, it would not be able to kill them instantly. Of course, this had to do with Bai Xiaowen's temporary Lord class status. The 130 points of spirit type bonus was not a joke. If the Lord class bonus disappeared, the skeleton swords and shield strength would be relatively weaker. All attributes would drop by 4 points. The next step was to open the treasure chests. Although Han Su was not around, so many treasure chests piled up in the inventory took up a lot of space. Moreover, they did not know if they would be able to draw anything that would have an immediate effect on the battle. Thus, after the 4 of them discussed, they did not wait to meet up with Han Su and directly open the treasure chests. In any case, Han Su was the only tank in the team. If there was any tank equipment, they could just leave it to him. There were more than 100 silver treasure chests. Most of them were empty and only gave spirit energy points. As for the other treasure chests, he obtained more than 20 pieces of blue equipment, 3 enhancement cards, 1 4-star, 2 3-star, and some miscellaneous items that he did not need. There were 5 gold treasure chests. 2 of them were C grade and 3 were D grade. Fortunately, there were no empty slots. Apricot's luck was not bad. She finally drew a 4-star enhancement card, 3 gold equipment, and an item. Out of the 3 pieces of yellow gold equipment, other than the clown sea serpent leg guards that increased vitality and was suitable for Han Su, the other 2 were yellow gold equipment that Apricot could not use. Their attributes were very ordinary and could only be broken down or used to strengthen equipment. There was no need to go into details. These were just appetizers. The real feast was the dark gold treasure chest that Shuren had dropped. Shuren was a level 9 Lord class monster. He had died under the siege of 1 Lord class monster and 3 heroes from the White Phoenix team. The Snake Mother Galilala's petrification aura also played a role. In addition, there were some stray arrows and missiles on the battlefield, which also reduced a certain battle score. However, he was still a Lord class monster. The rules of the spiritual realm were not too harsh. They still gave him a C grade score, which was above the passing line. Chapter 1009. The only chance was given to Li Shi, and Li Shi lived up to everyone's expectations. She drew a gold item. Item: Whip of Brutality, C grade gold item. Deals 10 true damage, minimum 20 points, based on the current HP of a living being. The target will gain buff, attack power will increase by 100, and all physical damage will be healed by 100. During the duration of the effect, the target's physical strength will be doubled until the target loses the ability to move due to exhaustion or the effect is blocked by the user. Number of uses, 3/3. Recharge 1 stack every 7 days. This gold item was in the shape of a Shao whip, which looked quite embarrassing. However, considering its powerful effect and its recyclability, it was worthy of being a C-grade gold item. Compared to White Phoenix Apricot's other C-grade gold item, the Call of the North, the effect of the Whip of Brutality was not as terrifying as the Summon Lord. However, the Summon of the North item was only effective because of the special relationship between Bai Xiaowen and the Black Knight leader, Gloria. With this major premise, there was no comparison in itself. In addition, it could only be used once. After that, he had to return to Northrend Island and help Gloria again to recharge it. It was very troublesome and could only be used as a backup strategic weapon. The total number of uses of the whip of brutality and the unconditional recharge of one stack every 7 days was simply too convenient. Coupled with the solid special effect, it could be used as a conventional weapon. To be honest, the value of this gold item was not inferior to a dark gold item. In addition, in the Shuren's treasure chest, a special item that was not included in the list of spoils of war dropped. Tattered compass, special item. This broken compass contains the smell of the sea. Please find a professional who is proficient in forging for more information. Bai Xiaowen narrowed his eyes. A professional who was proficient in forging was undoubtedly in the Dwarf Kingdom in the Dark Tide Plain. Han Su's skills were too shallow. His teacher seemed to be good. Since it's related to forging, this thing should be a piece of equipment, right? Dark gold equipment? Li Shi was slightly expectant. Well, it's possible. Don't think too much. Go and rest. The fleet returned to Silver Harbor without any surprises or dangers. Captain Julian led the Free Corps to guard the ship, while Bai Xiaowen led the White Phoenix team and the Snake Dowager to the command center of Moat's Great Mine. A group of commander-class powerhouses hurried over at high speed. But later, when they passed by the Alliance Army's defense and saw the Snake Dowager's unusual body size, they were stopped by the sentries questioning. Of course, after Bai Xiaowen revealed his identity, these sentries let him pass unconditionally. Not long after, Bai Xiaowen and the others arrived at the command center. You're finally back safely. To be honest, I was worried about you. In front of the map table, Ahan's expression was somewhat grave. When he saw the mother of snakes Kaglila behind Bai Xiaowen, he did not make a fuss like an ordinary person. Instead, he calmly said, Dio, aren't you going to introduce this lady to me? Well, I was just about to introduce her to you. Bai Xiaowen stood in the middle and said, This is one of the 3 lords of the Abyss faction, and also the only remaining lord. She is the leader of the Quagmire Naga tribe, also known as the Snake Mother, Lady Jaglila. I've seen her before. An orc general shouted angrily. She appeared with that damned snake people scholar in the Galgulch Highlands. The Snake Dowager smiled and said, I think you look familiar too. Are you one of the people I petrified? You despicable banshee. How dare you be so arrogant? Calm down. Bai Xiaowen raised his hand. The orc general could only respect him and sat down angrily. Wait a minute. Dior, you just said that she's the only remaining lord of the snake people camp? Ahan grasped the key point. You mean, well, the surprise attack on the underwater snake people's production base was fruitful. Brutal Lord Shuren has been killed. Bai Xiaowen nodded and threw out another piece of good news. In addition, all the magic craftsmen in the snake people's production base were killed, and the production facility was destroyed. At least we don't have to worry about the snake people's magic crystal cannons increasing in number. Of course, they have a lot of magic crystal cannons now, so we need to pay attention to them. You destroyed the snake people's production base? Ponga Greybeard's eyes widened. You didn't meet the Great Lord? Huh? Didn't the Great Lord attack the ley line corridor from another route? Bai Xiaowen said. The Snake Dowager was in charge of the feint attack, and the Great Lord took a large fleet and entered the ley line corridor through the Golden Tooth mining area's plank road. Why didn't you intercept him? The leaders in the room were all dumbfounded. Ahan said, The other lords and I led a large number of troops to wait in the Golden Tooth mining area, but the Great Lord didn't show up. The reconnaissance teams didn't detect any traces of the Great Lord, and the sentry posts didn't report any news of the Great Lord's invasion. Therefore, we unanimously concluded that the Great Lord had returned to the base, which was why we were so worried about your safety. The Great Lord didn't return to the base? Bai Xiaowen said. Otherwise, I wouldn't have had time to run. As he spoke, Bai Xiaowen glanced at the Snake Dowager. Strange, the people I planted under the Great Lord's command did tell me that the Great Lord continued to march and didn't return to the base, and the subsequent facts also prove this point. The Snake Dowager Galilala said thoughtfully. That's strange. We thought that the Great Lord had returned to the base, and you thought that the Great Lord continued to march, but no one encountered him. This guy's size is not small, and the fleet he leads is even larger. Where can he hide? More importantly, what schemes does he have up his sleeves? In the command room, there was a constant buzzing sound. Bai Xiaowen suddenly said, "The Great Lord's target is only the Earth Vein Corridor. Otherwise, Wu Fengshe would have given up the underwater base, the snake magic craftsman he worked so hard to transform, and even the life of a lord. The only reason he paid such a heavy price is because of the more important target, the Earth Vein Corridor. The only way to the Earth Vein Corridor has been heavily guarded. As long as the Great Lord dares to show his face, he will definitely be discovered," the old dwarf, Ponga Greybeard, said. Suddenly, the magic array beside the map table flashed. Ahan's expression changed slightly, and a Camelot mage beside him rushed up and connected the magic array. This was a communication magic array, and as the light flashed, the image of a panicked dwarf was revealed. Requesting reinforcements, requesting reinforcements. A large number of snake men monsters have arrived at the Earth Vein Corridor. They are coming. They are coming. Ugh. Chapter 10:10. The communication was cut off. The command room was silent. The silence lasted for a few seconds, and then the crowd burst into discussion. How is that possible? Even if the Nagas grew wings, they couldn't possibly fly to the Earth Vein Corridor. There are so many sentries watching, are they all useless? I seriously suspect that the dwarven sentries are all drinking and sleeping. Ahan's expression was somewhat ugly as he said in a deep voice, "Everyone, quiet down." The clamor continued, mainly because the news was too shocking. "Everyone, quiet down." Ahan raised his voice, and Lord-level psionic particles spread out, instantly restoring silence to the command room. Everyone looked at Ahan in unison, wanting to see what the commander-in-chief had to say. Ahan's scalp was a little numb, but he still wisely found a way out. "Prophet Dior, what do you think?" Bai Xiaowen's thoughts turned very quickly. After the initial surprise, he recovered before the others and began to think of countermeasures. He understood that once a bad thing became an established fact, there was no need to pursue responsibility, nor was there time to be emotional or angry. Finding the best solution to the current situation was the most important thing. Since the main force of the Nagas has already killed their way to the Earth Vein Corridor, our top priority now is to quickly reinforce them. Fortunately, we aren't far from the entrance to the Earth Vein Corridor, and the Nagas will need time to destroy it. The dwarven garrison in the Earth Vein Corridor can also buy us some time. Bai Xiaowen said in a deep voice. First, the new lords who have already recognized the sacred artifact as their master should quickly rush to the Earth Vein Corridor with Her Majesty Queen Carmelo, Marshal Ahan, and me. Only the sacred artifact can restrain the Great Lord. Second, I took back the sacred artifact, Akali's Wrath, from the cruel overlord Shuren. Please arrange for powerhouses who are good at using two-handed axes to try one by one and find a suitable master for the sacred artifact as soon as possible. I suggest starting with the Beastman Kingdom. Back when he took the hidden sword and shield from the Beastman Kingdom, Bai Xiaowen had promised the Beastmen that once he found a new sacred artifact, he would give them the right to try it first. Moreover, the Orc Kingdom and the brutal meat-cleaving axe had a pretty high chance of matching. At this point, Bai Xiaowen paused for a moment and looked at the Medusa, Kaglila. "Miss Jaglila, I'm sure you've made up your mind." Snake Matriarch's expression was calm. "When I returned to help you, I was already mentally prepared to face the Great Lord." "All right." Bai Xiaowen nodded and looked at Ahan. "Commander-in-Chief, please give the order." Ahan nodded heavily. "Good. Pass down the order to the entire army to immediately reinforce the Earth Vein Corridor. Experts who wish to attempt to claim ownership of the final holy artifact, please register with Great Wizard Gibbs. Once you succeed, hurry to the Earth Vein Corridor as soon as possible." One order after another was issued from Ahan in an orderly manner. "The last one?" Bai Xiaowen asked curiously. Isn't there still a divine artifact that hasn't recognized a master yet? I haven't had time to inform the prophet yet, Ahan said. Apollo's whispering sacred artifact already has a master. Who is it? It's me, Your Excellency Prophet. A slightly familiar female voice sounded. Bai Xiaowen looked up. The female elf, Dorothea Goldleaf, appeared at the entrance of the command room with a longbow that was as tall as a person and emitted a magnificent luster on her back. Her body was suffused with the aura of an expert that only an overlord possessed. That was the halo's passive ability. Dorothea Goldleaf had just rushed over after receiving the order to assemble the holy artifact overlords. Behind Dorothea Goldleaf was the powerful and muscular barbarian Basaka, the solemn-looking knight Captain Harold Atherton, and the graceful and luxurious Queen Camelot, who was the focus of everyone's attention. Together with Ahan and Bai Xiaowen, the 6 holy artifact overlords had gathered. Let's go! There were no traces of battle at the entrance of the Earth Vein Corridor. Including Snake Matriarch, the 7 overlords felt a little strange after leading their armies here. If they had not sensed the faint fluctuations of psionic power and the sounds of fighting in the space inside the Earth Vein Corridor, everyone would have thought that the alarm of the Naga's attack was a mistake. There are no traces of battle here, which means that the Nagas have found another secret passage that leads to the Earth Vein Corridor. Perhaps they snuck over from the bottom of the sea. Bai Xiaowen said, the reason why the Great Lord gave up on returning to his home base and continued marching is probably because he has mastered a new secret passage. The cave at the entrance of the Earth Vein Corridor was very narrow, and the army could only enter in a single file. Including Bai Xiaowen, the 7 overlords stepped into the cave first. Soon, their field of vision opened up, and the Earth Vein Corridor, or rather, the battlefield, with the only giant pillars supporting the dome appeared in front of everyone. This was not a battle, but a massacre. The Nagas had chased after the dwarf defenders. The corpses of the dwarves who had stayed behind were everywhere, but the corpses of the Nagas were rarely seen. This battle-loss ratio was completely illogical. Although the main force of the Nagas was extremely elite, the main reason for this was the stalwart black shadow that was as huge as a mountain in the center of the battlefield. It was a giant monster with 9 heads, a terrifying great lord. Terrifying waves spread from his body and shrouded the entire battlefield. Under this terrible pressure, the dwarves lost their will to fight, and their strength was weakened by several levels. How could they still have the capital to fight against the main force of the Nagas? Bai Xiaowen immediately used insight on the Great Lord. The spiritual realm's rules prompted a message: the target's template is too high, insight failed. Data is in disorder. A faint red light flashed in Bai Xiaowen's left eye. Soon, the spiritual realm's rules sent another message. For unknown reasons, 10,000 psionic points will be deducted, and the target creature will be alerted. Yes/no? Bai Xiaowen was well aware of this, and chose to pay without hesitation. Now was not the time to save money. If he could get even a little more information about the Great Lord, it would be valuable. Amitabha, God's Descendant Creature Level 6, /Descending State, Race, God's Descendant, Attributes, Strength 100, Agility 78, Constitution 200, Spirit 40 plus 100, God's Descendant Talent, Immortal Body, Inactive, Descendant Talent. Special Skill, Abyssal Infusion. Amitabha can inject his own blood into a life form through a special ritual, giving it a certain probability of obtaining a template upgrade. At the same time, the race of the target life form will be forcibly transformed. Amitabha can use his own blood to write incantations and cast transformation altars. The probability of obtaining a template upgrade for a life form transformed through the altar will be greatly reduced. Combat Skill? Bai Xiaowen's scalp tingled. Was this guy really only level 6? Chapter 10-11. His constitution was as high as 200 points, which was 70 points higher than the level 9 Lord Shuren that Bai Xiaowen had killed before. 100 points of strength meant that he was at least at the level of a high-level strength-type lord. 78 points of dexterity was slightly weaker, but that was only relative. 78 points of dexterity was already at the level of a high-level lord with dexterity. Of course, the Great Lord's mountain-like body limited his dexterity attribute, so his attack speed was definitely not as fast as Li Shi's. However, having a large body size also had its advantages. The Great Lord's combat skills would definitely have terrifying additional damage. Bai Xiaowen could imagine the AoE effects like cleave, the crushing damage caused by crushing, and the knockback effects of normal attacks. Originally, Amitava's 40 points of spirit was considered weak. However, Amitava was currently possessed by the Great Lord. At least part of the Great Lord's spirit was added to Amitava's body, so it was reflected in a value of 100 points. 140 points of total spirit was even higher than Bai Xiaowen's, who had spirit as his specialty. Xiao Rui said with some surprise, "I heard that above the Lord tier is the King tier, and above that is the Descendant of God tier. This difference of 2 or 3 tiers is indeed terrifying. This is only level 6. If it were level 7 or level 8 Descendant of God, there would be a qualitative change." Bai Xiaowen hummed in acknowledgement. While Bai Xiaowen was using insight on the Great Lord also noticed him. After all, Bai Xiaowen had used Eye of Evolution to forcefully detect the Great Lord's attributes, so naturally, the Great Lord was alerted. You are Dior Kalebloom." The Great Lord's 9 heads opened their mouths at the same time, and his rumbling voice reverberated like thunder, reverberating back and forth in the earth vein corridor. Echoes could be heard from the distant rock walls of the earth vein corridor. As the Great Lord spoke, the fierce battle on the battlefield calmed down for the time being. The remnants of the dwarven garrison, who had suffered heavy casualties, finally rushed back to the reinforcements and reported the situation to Marshal Ahan, Hawkeye, Greybeard, and the other dwarven chiefs. Under the Great Lord's mental command, the elite Serpent Men forces regrouped and rearranged their formation. They were only waiting for the order to rejoin the battle. The Great Lord looked at Bai Xiaowen and continued speaking. "You stole my treasure in the latent shadow maze. Now, you actually dare to stand in front of me. You're seeking your own death." Along with the Great Lord's voice, waves of powerful pressure spread out. The faces of the soldiers of the Alliance army were all deathly pale. The weak soldiers who weren't at the elite level even rolled their eyes and fainted. The 7 suzerains, including the Snake Dowager, released psionic waves at the same time. The passive effect of 7 halos spread out, and only then did they manage to resist the Great Lord's pressure. However, as one of the 7 suzerains, Bai Xiaowen could clearly sense that the Great Lord had not used his full strength at all. In other words, he had not activated the active effect of his halos. Otherwise, the 7 suzerains would have had a hard time resisting. In the face of the Great Lord's threat, Bai Xiaowen smiled. "Hello, Great Lord. Or should I say, the will of a foreign plane. We don't know who's seeking death today." Bai Xiaowen's relaxed attitude seemed to affect the people around him. Ahan and the other suzerains' expressions eased a lot. "Humph," the Great Lord snorted coldly. "I don't need you to make irresponsible remarks about my origins. You're not a native of the Black Tide Plain. I know the origins of you and your kind. So, you're not Dior Kalebloom at all. Now, tell me your real name." Bai Xiaowen shrugged. "Sorry, it's a secret." Ahan and the others only looked at Bai Xiaowen with some surprise and did not ask anything. This was the benefit of having a worship reputation. In the eyes of Ahan and the others, Bai Xiaowen had already contributed so much to the Alliance that it did not matter whether he was a native of the Black Tide Plain or not. What was important was that Bai Xiaowen was now fighting alongside them and was an indispensable member. The Great Lord was not angry and continued to speak. "Fine. I don't care who you are. You're not a human of the Black Tide Plain, so naturally, you don't have to be responsible for the sinking of the Black Tide continent. Why don't we make a deal? I can pay you 10 times the reward for saving the continent. I can even increase your strength and allow you to reach a higher level." Bai Xiaowen soon received a notification from the Spirit Realm's laws. "Amitava wants to make a contract with you." Bai Xiaowen skimmed through the contents of the contract. It was nothing more than giving up the Alliance camp and returning the item from Amitava's remains, the Eye of Amitava. If he did this, Bai Xiaowen would get a chance to inject the abyss. However, after the contract was signed, the Spirit Realm's laws immediately sent a message, warning, if you accept the abyss infusion, your race will change, and there will be unpredictable consequences. Don't worry so much. I won't betray you. Bai Xiaowen smiled as if answering the Spirit Realm's laws. He silently added in his heart, unless the other party is sincere enough. By the way, Ahan. Bai Xiaowen said, the relic of the scale of Amitava is still in your hands, right? Ahan nodded. Give it to me. Bai Xiaowen stretched out his hand. Ahan did not ask why and directly handed the scale of Amitava to Bai Xiaowen. Bai Xiaowen put it away in his storage space. Your Excellency, now the Eye of Amitava and the scale of Amitava are both in my hands. Bai Xiaowen showed a smile that deserved a beating. You can't take the things in my hands by force. You can't do it even if you kill me. I believe you should be very clear on this point. The Great Lord's vertical pupils shrank slightly, and the fluctuations of his suppressive force became more intense. Of course, he knew very well that as an awakened, Bai Xiaowen had a storage space, and the natives of the Spirit Realm could not get their hands on it. It was precisely because the Great Lord knew this that he had painstakingly created a game of extraordinaries in the latent shadow labyrinth in an attempt to bait Bai Xiaowen into obediently accepting his spiritual influence and becoming his slave, so that he would voluntarily offer up the Eye of Amitava. Those two relics are nothing to me. The Great Lord did not want Bai Xiaowen to be so smug. However, Bai Xiaowen sneered and pointed it out. Nothing? I don't think so. Your Excellency, it's precisely because you're missing these two relics that your strength has not fully recovered. You should only be at 60 to 80% of your strength, and you might have some weaknesses. If you obtain these two relics, I'm afraid you'll really be invincible. You! The Great Lord's voice turned cold, and suddenly, a strong spiritual fluctuation surged out. Chapter 10-12. The scenery in front of Bai Xiaowen's eyes changed rapidly. Correspondingly, his consciousness also became blurry. When Bai Xiaowen woke up again, the soldiers in front of him and the ley line corridor had already disappeared. Scenes of his childhood memories, the memories of Bai Xiaowen in the Common Era and the memories of Bai Xiaowen in the Era of Psionic Ability were dug out. In the Common Era, Bai Xiaowen had no memories of his father. As for his mother's memories, they stopped abruptly when he could remember things. The last scene of his parents' memories was his mother's back as she walked away under the heavy snow. No matter how Bai Xiaowen shouted, his mother walked forward step by step and never looked back. In the Era of Psionic Ability, Bai Xiaowen had lost his mother since he was young. His memories of his father, Bai Yuan Tang, were also cut off when he could remember things. The last scene was also snowflakes dancing in the sky. It was also a back view that was determined to leave. Behind that back view, there was also a Bai Xiaowen shouting. The scene in the memories of the two lives was so similar. If there was a difference, it would be that in the Era of Psionic Ability, Bai Xiaowen was shouting for his father. There was another person beside him. His elder sister, Bai Xiaohua, was holding his younger sister, Bai Xiaojun, who was in her infancy. Her gentle words of comfort kept repeating. Go home, Xiaowen. Sister, does Daddy not want us anymore? That won't happen, Xiaowen. Don't worry, I will definitely find Daddy. His memories quickly blurred. Finally, a scene condensed in front of Bai Xiaowen's eyes. In this life, his father, Bai Yuan Tang, his mother, Li Xiao, his elder sister, Bai Xiaohua, and his younger sister, Bai Xiaojun, were waving at him from afar. They were so close that they looked like a family. There was only a river between the family and Bai Xiaowen. And under Bai Xiaowen's feet was a bridge. Go home. Go home. Go home, the voice was like a curse, echoing in Bai Xiaowen's heart. Bai Xiaowen took his first step in confusion. In the void, there seemed to be a blurry giant's face that revealed a smug smile. But soon, the smile on the blurry giant's face turned into shock. Impossible. His voice was like thunder, and the illusory scene in front of Bai Xiaowen shattered like fragile glass. The scenery in front of him had returned to the battlefield. Soldiers in formation, generals and feudal lords with powerful auras, great lords as tall as mountains. Bai Xiaowen clutched his aching left eye. A red light flashed across his eyes. However, there was a cold smile on his face. The last guy who used illusions to plot against me, I'm afraid the grass on his grave is half a meter tall, right? Spiritual realm rule notification, unknown reason, data is in disorder. 23105 spiritual energy points deducted. When he was under the illusion, Bai Xiaowen received the first notification from the spirit realm's laws. He was under the influence of the Great Lord's mental suggestion and was making a judgment. Also, due to unknown reasons, 23105 psionic energy points will be deducted. Do you agree? After receiving this notification, Bai Xiaowen agreed without hesitation. This caused the illusion mirror image to shatter and Bai Xiaowen to return to reality. That was the reason why the Great Lord had said impossible. From the direction of Bai Xiaowen's left eye, a thin red light shot out. The red light that only Bai Xiaowen could see crossed layers of space and shot toward the Great Lord. The Great Lord snorted. However, the Great Lord did not faint from the counterattack of the Eye of Evolution as Bai Xiaowen thought. His voice boomed like thunder. You're not simple, human. Bai Xiaowen was no less surprised than the Great Lord. He snorted. Same here. It seems that there's no way to achieve my goal through gentle means. Then, I can only conquer through force. The Great Lord's multiple echoes reverberated in the empty ley line corridor. Don't be anxious. I think we can still talk. Bai Xiaowen wanted to stall for time. The Great Lord merely snorted and ignored Bai Xiaowen. The 18 snake eyes on the 9 heads were all staring at the mother of snakes, Kagelia, why did you betray me? You should know that the strong are respected. You should also know that there's a huge difference in strength between me and mortals. Most importantly, I'm the god of the snake people tribe. You've betrayed your own tribe. Kagelia's face was slightly pale, but she still withstood the pressure. You're wrong, Great Lord. You're not the great Amitabha himself. You've only stolen his holy body. You've blasphemed against the snake people's god. You've indeed been bewitched by the human prophet. So, are you prepared to give up your life for your beliefs? At the same time, you'll sacrifice the lives of the entire Quagmire tribe? I won't stand on the side that has no chance of winning, Your Excellency. Snake Mother Kagelia composed herself. If you continue to be so invincible, I won't betray you indeed. But ever since Prophet Dior C. Kale Boom descended on the mainland again, you've been defeated again and again. Those hybrid snake people you transformed into have also suffered heavy casualties. Now, the 3 snake people overlords are all gone, and there are more than 7 overlords on the human side. I originally didn't believe in human poetry. I only believed in strength. But now, I feel that you'll be defeated by the combined efforts of the brave as an evil demon king, just like how the epics described you. So, I've chosen to stand on the prophet's side. The Great Lord looked up to the sky and roared. His voice was like rolling thunder. Stupid. Short-sighted. Naive. You're already hopeless. Then, you'll be buried in the sea together with your brave. What's the big deal about the 3 overlords? If I can create 2 overlords, I can create 20. As long as I'm here, the abyss will never fail. Soldiers, charge. The person who makes the greatest contribution will receive my favor and replace the old 3 overlords as the new leader of the snake people. Dong dong dong, the dull sound of war drums sounded. Under the stimulation of strength and the Great Lord's coercion, the snake people's eyes turned red as they roared and charged toward the Alliance army's formation. On Bai Xiaowen's side, Ahan also led his army to charge. The 2 armies were like 2 torrents of steel. 100 steps, 50 steps, 20 steps, the torrents of steel collided with a loud bang. Blades collided with blades, and roars and miserable howls intertwined. Blood rained down. This was the first large-scale head-on battle between the Alliance Army and the Snake People Army since the establishment of the Alliance Army. It might also be the last. Sometimes, a crucial battle was enough to determine the outcome of a confrontation between two camps. If the Alliance Army won and the Snake People elites were all killed, the Great Lord might be able to escape, but he would have to lay low for several years to accumulate strength before he could make a comeback. If he was unlucky and was left here permanently, he could announce the unification of the Snake People in advance. Chapter 10:13. On the other hand, if the Snake People camp won, the Great Lord would be able to destroy the Leyline Pillar and drown a large portion of the Dwarven Kingdom's territory, including the Great Mine of Moat. He would then turn all of the Allied army soldiers in this area into fish and turtles in the water. At that time, the Nagas would be sitting on the rich resources of the Great Mines of Moat and a large number of newly captured high-level prisoners of war. They would be used to replenish their troops and increase their strength greatly. The countries on the continent would basically have no hope. This was the key battle that would determine the fate of the continent. It came so suddenly that no one was prepared for it. It was also because of the Great Lord's reckless advance that the Nagas had no choice but to fight. The Great Lord was not a fool. He was well aware of the situation. The countries had a large base of population and great war potential. Now that the alliance had just been established, they had assembled an army that could fight against the Nagas. If the countries were given more time, the number of the Nagas would increase tenfold. Although the Nagas had the advanced technology brought by the Great Lord, the numbers were still there. Moreover, it was not easy to find people to operate the advanced technology of the magic crystal cannons. The longer the battle dragged on, the more disadvantageous it would be for the Abyss. The Great Lord knew Bai Xiaowen's identity as an awakened. He also knew that the awakened could only stay in the spirit realm for a limited time. Therefore, when Bai Xiaowen first arrived in the Black Tide realm, the Great Lord's idea was to ignore him for the time being. When Bai Xiaowen's time was up, he would leave on his own. He did not change his plan because of Bai Xiaowen's arrival. However, Bai Xiaowen, Spirit Realm Rule, add a clock. Okay. Spirit Realm Rule, add a clock? No problem. Later, it developed into Spirit Realm Rule, dear guest, do you want to add a clock? Bai Xiaowen, okay. After waiting for a month, the Great Lord finally realized that something was wrong. The rules of the spiritual realm, which was also the will of the realm of the Black Tide realm, also known as the will of the heavens, treated Bai Xiaowen too well. It was targeting Fatty Geo. My arrival must have made the realm will feel that something was wrong, so it sent a representative to fight against me. Bai Xiaowen was the representative of the will of the dimension, or rather, the child of the dimension. His imagination was one thing, but the Great Lord didn't panic. After years of seclusion in the Black Tide realm, he had gone from being cautious at the beginning, to being greedy in the middle, to being unscrupulous now. So what if it was a planar will? There was no way they could deal with him personally. They could only make things difficult for him within the limits of the rules and provide convenience for their opponents. However, how could such a small stumbling block stop absolute strength? Today, I, the Great Lord, will kill all who stand in my way. I will slaughter all who stand in my way. I will wipe out all who stand in the way of my great plan. Divine Halo, Impassioned. Divine Halo, Pierce. Divine Halo, Heavy Soldier. Divine Halo, Gale. Divine Halo, Burning Eyes. Divine Halo, Intimidate. Divine Aura, Exhaustion. Terrifying fluctuations erupted from the Great Lord's mountainous body. 4 rays of light enveloped all the Nagas, while the other 3 rays of light landed on the allied soldiers. The Nagas roared like a tidal wave. Any fear of death was swept away. At this moment, they would not be defeated even if they had to fight to the last man. Cold, green light flickered on the blades. The dwarven armor on the allied soldiers was cut open like soft tofu. blood spurted everywhere. Their armor flickered with a faint golden light. When the enemy's attacks landed on the Nagas, they almost didn't feel any pain. Their wrists were more agile and powerful, and the speed at which they swung their weapons was at least 50% faster. On the other hand, the Allied soldiers were in a different situation. Large flashes of light suddenly appeared in front of them. Every enemy on the opposite side seemed to have become the surface of a lake that reflected sunlight. The sparkling light was a beautiful scene, but on the battlefield, it was a fatal curse. They were originally carefully selected elites, brave warriors who would fight to the death. However, the moment the halo touched them, many of them thought of their wives and children far away in their hometowns. It evoked the fear of death and the fear of battle. What was even more frightening was that every time they swung their weapons, the Allied soldiers felt exhausted. Their stamina was being depleted at an accelerated rate. After the Great Lord activated the Divine Halo, the steel torrent that was originally colliding with each other actually showed a one-sided situation. The Seven Lords all had shocked expressions in their eyes. This Divine Halo's effect was actually not discounted for lords like them, who had extremely high base priority and had a great advantage in all aspects. Yes, as lords, having a base priority of 5 points was already very terrifying. However, the Great Lord's base priority was 7 points. In fact, after Bai Xiaowen knew that the Great Lord was a god-descendant creature 2 levels higher than lords, he was no longer surprised that he had once caused the data of the spiritual realm's rules to become chaotic and issued a fake main storyline mission to himself. With a base priority of 7 points, if he had a 4-star mental suggestion skill, he could reach a total priority of 11 points, which was the same as the priority of the spiritual realm's rules in the awakened planes, 11 points. If the Great Lord's mental suggestion skill reached 5-star or above, he would be above the spiritual realm's rules in the awakened planes. This was the terrifying thing about god-descendant creatures. Their priority was so high that they could do whatever they wanted. As for god-descendant creatures, they shouldn't appear in the awakened planes. In fact, even king-class masters shouldn't appear in the awakened planes. In the awakened planes, the spiritual realm's creatures were generally at the level of lords. In the highly difficult Swordsong plane, the peerless masters of the 4 uniques who looked down on the world were only at the level of lords. The difficulty of the Black Tide plane was not as high as that of the Swordsong plane, so how could something as terrifying as a god-descendant creature appear? Although there were legends of the god-descendant creature Amitabha and the Guardian sect, they were just remains and were just a part of the background story of the Black Tide plane. However, since the 7 lords could be recognized by the sacred weapon, they were all strong-willed people. They still had a strong resistance to the influence of the Great Lord's divine halo. We can't go on like this. Our soldiers are being slaughtered. Ahan raised his 2-handed greatsword, and his deep and majestic voice resounded through the battlefield. Brothers and sisters, let's fight side by side. Whoosh! The halo of bravery spread out like a bolt of lightning, dispelling the confusion and fear in the hearts of the Allied soldiers. The barbarian Baraka suddenly waved his bone-piercing hammer and let out an earth-shattering roar. Assault Halo! The attack power of all allies soared by 50%. The female elf Dorothea Goldleaf said softly, "The sun god illuminates your path." Sun-chasing halo, when all allies deal damage, additional sunlight damage, regarded as holy damage, will be added. Chapter 10-14. The Snake Dowager's scream echoed through the leyline corridor. The petrification aura was fully activated, and all the enemy snake men's attack speed was reduced. The Knight Captain, Harold Atherton, raised his hidden sword and shield and stood at the front. He didn't say a word, but the aura had already been activated. Durability aura, all allies' physical recovery speed is doubled, and stamina consumption is halved. Queen Camelo and Bai Xiaowen looked at each other and nodded slightly. Queen Camelo raised Azuz's scepter of authority. Command aura, all enemies' movement speed is continuously reduced, and after reaching the peak, they are temporarily imprisoned. Periodically triggered. Bai Xiaowen activated the Wisdom Aura to restrict the Snake Men's spellcasters. The Seven Lords' auras were activated at the same time. Although they didn't completely offset the effects of the Great Lord's divine aura, they successfully put the battle into a stalemate. The Snake Men's army was also greatly limited by the aura effects of the Lords. The balance of the battle was no longer one-sided. When the Alliance army soldiers fought against the Snake Men, they were no longer defeated immediately. Bai Xiaowen kept waving Mara's Wand of Wisdom to kill the elite Snake Men. Such a grand battle scene was no longer a problem that could be solved with 1 or 2 shots of Oro Chi. The auras of the Seven Lords and the descendants of God were basically equal. The outcome of the battle actually depended on the basic combat power of both sides, which was a large number of standard template warriors and a large number of elite warriors. Of course, as many as 100 leaders and more than 10 rare leaders were also involved in the battle. They could be used as sharp knives on the battlefield, poking open the enemy's front line and dividing the advance of the basic warriors on their side. They played a leading role. A Snake Man slave warrior with broken shells at the corners of his eyes waved his bone sword and slashed a slender Alliance army soldier to the ground. He opened his mouth wide and roared. He raised his sword with both hands and was about to slash down vertically to end his opponent's life. A lance came out of his back, and blood splattered. An elite knight of Altoria pulled out a blood-stained lance with a cold face and then pulled the reins vigilantly. Amidst the neighing of the horse, the knight's horse raised its front hooves, but it still couldn't avoid a heavy hammer whistling toward it. The warhorse rolled and fell into a pool of blood. A tall and burly Naga warrior with a heavy hammer opened his mouth that was filled with fine teeth and let out a cold sneer. In the pool of blood, the knight flipped over and stood up. He abandoned his lance and pulled out the rapier at his waist. Then, he charged towards the elite Naga warrior. However, before the two of them could clash again, a bone spike arrow was shot at the knight of Altoria. The arrow pierced through the knight's armor like it was made of paper. The powerful kinetic energy carried the knight's body and sent him flying far away. In the direction where the arrow came from, a serpent-human priest-level expert knocked an arrow and aimed at the next target. His expression was calm. As a max-level rare boss, killing a high-level elite was not an achievement at all. It was just a normal killing state. Of course, that Naga warrior didn't survive. An anvil-like figure crashed into him. The dwarf Ponga Greybeard's warhammer smashed the warrior's skull. Blood and brain matter splattered everywhere. As far as the eye could see, the battlefield was filled with such scenes. Every second, there would be people dying in battle. Every second, there would be broken limbs. Every second, there would be blood dripping in ghastly white bones. It was a ghastly sight. The nerves of the White Phoenix team had been baptized by countless battles. They had become very tough. Although the standard of this battle was high, thanks to their previous training, they didn't feel uncomfortable at all. The fierce battle lasted for a long time. When both sides were exhausted, Ahan waved his hand. The dense drumbeats sounded again like raindrops, and the reserve team entered the battle. 30 seconds later, the Snake people also sent out their reserve troops. The two camps were like two experienced boxers. After a short breather, they gathered their strength and threw a second punch at each other. "It's about time, right?" Queen Camelo said softly. Looking at the bloody scene, she couldn't bear it. However, she still had the rationality of a superior. Although she couldn't bear it, she wouldn't compromise. Following Queen Camelo's question, the other lords looked at Bai Xiaowen. "Yes. We should go too." Bai Xiaowen had been casting spells from afar, reaping the lives of the low-health Naga elites. He had gained a lot from this fierce battle. The other 6 lords basically didn't make a move. This was also Bai Xiaowen's request. The lords had to preserve their precious physical and mental strength to fight against the strongest boss of this battle, the god's descendant creature, the Great Lord. As for Bai Xiaowen, he had the dark gold top, the purple ribbon cloud brocade robe, which doubled his recovery speed, and the blood essence stone's dual absorption ability. Naturally, he could be more willful. Up until now, Bai Xiaowen had been casting basic spells, but his physical and mental strength were still full. After receiving Bai Xiaowen's confirmation, Han suddenly roared. Charge, target, the Great Lord! Defeat the Great Lord! Defeat the evil god! The 7 lords charged forward in a mighty manner. Han brandished Valen's great sword of justice. His movements were skillful, and all the Snake People warriors he encountered along the way were either beheaded or cut in half on the spot. They couldn't even slow down Han's speed in the slightest. If Han's martial arts were a combination of strength and skill, then Basaka's was a demonstration of violence to the extreme. Every time he swung his bone-piercing hammer, a whirlwind of flesh and blood would appear, scattering the Naga's broken bones. Bai Xiaowen saw with his own eyes that a Naga general stood in front of Basaka, as if he wanted to test the new lord's strength. However, Basaka didn't even attack him. The bone-piercing hammer's whirlwind of flesh and blood simply swept past, causing the Naga general to roar in pain as one of his arms was cut off at the shoulder. Basaka paused for half a second, and the whirlwind of flesh and blood came back, directly strangling the Naga general to death. The bone-piercing hammer's blood-red light flickered, becoming even brighter. The new lord, Harold Atherton, who held the hidden sword and shield, was in charge of opening a path for the archers and mage-type lords behind him. The thin sword and shield were covered in a layer of holy light. Every time the thin sword stabbed out, every time the holy shield swung, the holy damage would spread out in waves of light, burning a large number of Nagas around him. Moreover, the energy waves caused by the holy shield also condensed a shield-like layer of light on the surface of Harold's body. Occasionally, a Naga general would shoot a long-range sniper rifle, but it couldn't penetrate Harold's light shield. It couldn't cause any damage to this new tank lord at all. Chapter 10-15. Bai Xiaowen was really relaxed and happy with the 3 powerful close combat lords opening the way. He only needed to find the right time to cast a spell that lasted for half a second in advance and snatch some kill contribution points, and he would be satisfied. The targets that Bai Xiaowen picked were either rare elites or leaders, and they were all quite powerful. And to the 3 lords, they did not have any awareness that their kills were being stolen. Bai Xiaowen's actions were just right for long-range support. The other members of the White Phoenix team were also fighting fiercely on the battlefield. Among them, Cecilia, who was also a long-range profession, rode on the elite Mount Wolf and followed beside Bai Xiaowen. She activated the arrow formation and shot continuously. Every arrow split into 2 other miniature arrows, forming a large-scale arrow rain. However, Cecilia's arrow formation only lasted for a few seconds and was not considered a powerful skill. Your archery is very good, but you have to pay attention to the use of mental energy. You can do better. A gentle female voice sounded. Cecilia turned her head and saw the pointy-eared female elf, Dorothea Goldleaf, riding a unicorn, galloping to her side. The weapon in the hands of the newly promoted lord, Dorothea Goldleaf, was the holy weapon that countless archers dreamed of, Apollo's whispering longbow. Dorothea did not have any arrows in her hands. She pulled the bowstring, and waves of scorching energy gathered, forming a total of 5 illusory energy arrows on the bowstring. Then, whoosh 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 whoosh. Multiple arrows flew out continuously, and each shot was a chain of 5 arrows. And Dorothea did not have a time limit at all. She just maintained the torrent of multiple arrows, and in a short 10 seconds, the battlefield in front of her was clear of a no-man's land that was 100 meters long and dozens of meters wide. Of course, in this no-man's land, there were a few rare elites and leaders. Although they were injured by the arrows, they were still in critical health and did not fall. What a pleasing archery skill. Thank you for your guidance, Dorothea. Bai Xiaowen smiled as he waved his magic wand, starting from the leaders, and laughed after snatching a few kill contribution points. Dorothea smiled slightly. I just did it casually. If your partner is willing, I can continue to teach her some archery skills. Thank you so much. It was very rare to receive a lord's teachings. Guan Yu's teachings had directly upgraded Bai Xiaowen's trash 1-star skill, Rebuke, to a 2-star mutated skill, Deterrence. There was no need to talk about the effect of deterrence. However, the fact that Bai Xiaowen was able to improve so much was also related to the fact that he was still weak back then. Generally speaking, the greater the difference in strength between the teacher, Spirit Realm Lord, and the teacher, Awakened, the greater the benefits. Bai Xiaowen asked Cecilia in the party channel. After receiving Dorothea's guidance and demonstration, she received a notification from the spiritual realm. You've gained a deeper understanding of the combat skill, arrow formation. Please ask the relevant spirit realm characters for more information. This was where the difference lay. When Bai Xiaowen saw Guan Yu's demonstration, he directly obtained a mutated skill. Of course, this might have something to do with my innate talent. Bai Xiaowen thought. That female archer just now is your partner, right? Dorothea said, her strength is not much weaker than mine before I obtain the divine artifact. I'm afraid she'll be very sad if she doesn't gain the recognition of the divine artifact. Bai Xiaowen understood that Dorothea was not teaching Cecilia on a whim. She was just giving Bai Xiaowen a little compensation. Of course, this had more to do with Cecilia. If Bai Xiaowen was not Cecilia's teammate, Dorothea would not have cared at all. Who was Bai Xiaowen? He stole a glance at Dorothea and saw that her favorability towards him had already reached the level of good friend. Furthermore, her favorability had already reached the level of moved. He immediately went along with the flow and said, that's right. She hasn't been sleeping well for so many days. Look, she already has dark circles under her eyes. Please teach her some Lord-tier archery skills. As long as she can see my movements clearly, she'll benefit a lot. Dorothea smiled and gestured for Cecilia to follow her. The two of them walked side by side. The scene was very harmonious. It had to be said that the appearance of the Lords of the Alliance was very impressive. They completely crushed the Naga army. On the way to the Great Lord, only 3 close combat lords and 1 archer lord attacked. It was enough. Of the remaining 3 lords, Bai Xiaowen was not in a hurry to attack, while Queen Carmelo and Snake Matriarch were not in a hurry to attack. The strength of the 7 lords also motivated the Alliance army. For a time, the Alliance army fought bravely and defeated the Nagas. However, the closer the 7 lords charged to the Great Lord, the more they realized how huge this guy was. The Great Lord's body was like a tall mountain. If placed on the sea, it would block out the sun. If placed on the ley line corridor, it would support the heavens and the earth. Its height was even comparable to the ley line pillars. If we cut off this guy's head, it would be enough to feed the entire country for a year, Bai Xiaowen muttered to himself as he looked at the Great Lord's neck, which was hundreds of meters in diameter. It was not easy to find a knife that could cut off such a huge neck. More importantly, there were 8 more necks like this one. With so many necks, it was easy to imagine how huge the Great Lord's torso was. Could it be that divine descendants were all so unbelievably huge? Great Lord, the enemy leaders are charging over. A Naga exclaimed. Let them come. The Great Lord spoke with an imposing aura. It doesn't matter how many of them come. They will only welcome destruction. Dong. The earth shook, and some of the small stalactites on the dome were even shaken off. This was because the Great Lord had taken a step forward. Dong dong dong, the Great Lord began to run. He launched a counterattack against the 7 lords, who were even smaller than ants to him. Not to mention how many unlucky fellows were trampled to death, even the warriors near the edge of the sole of the foot were stunned and sent flying by the shockwave visible to the naked eye. Both the Alliance army and the Nagas were terrified. They all retreated to the sides. This tacit understanding left no obstacles between the Great Lord and the 7 lords. Finally, the 2 sides clashed head-on. The first wave of confrontation had begun. Buzz! One of the Great Lord's heads fell with terrifying kinetic energy and powerful wind pressure. He opened his snake mouth wide and smashed toward the 7 lords like a heavy hammer. Spread out! Ahan roared, and the 7 lords quickly spread out to the sides. Then, there was a loud bang. The Great Lord's crazy head but even caused a local earthquake. A huge trench was dug in the ground. Gravel flew everywhere, and sand and dust filled the air. In front of this earth-shattering power, the 7 suzerains were as insignificant as dust. Even some of the rubble that the Great Lord had sent flying was larger than the 7 suzerains combined. Chapter 10:16. The Great Lord's absolute strength value was only 100 points. In terms of strength alone, he was not as good as Ahan, Basaka, and other strength-type lords. He could not even compare to some of the max-level strength-type lords. However, whether it was a max-level strength-type lord or a strength-type lord like Ahan, they could not achieve the terrifying destructive power of the Great Lord that could collapse mountains and change the landscape. There was only one reason: size. The butcher's body was several times larger than that of an ordinary person, which gave him a great advantage in all kinds of confrontation judgments. What about the Great Lord? His body alone was already larger than a castle. The head but just now was just the power of a bull's blade. The Great Lord also had 8 heads that looked exactly the same. Boom, 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 boom. A blow to the head came crashing down on his face. Fortunately, the Great Lord's agility was limited, and he was dragged down by his large body. It was not easy for him to hit the 7 lords. However, the terrifying wind pressure brought by the headbutt, as well as the terrifying shock wave after the landing, was enough for the 7 lords to suffer. The difference in strength is too great. Ahan's voice was a little dull. Bai Xiaowen understood Ahan's frustration. The other lords' pitiful, weak, and helpless expressions were even more obvious. The power of God's descendant creatures had been deeply imprinted in the minds of every lord. A level 6 God's descendant creature was enough to beat up a group of high-level lords. For example, a level 6 lord would be able to beat up a group of high elites. Moreover, the destructive power displayed by the Great Lord was only the physical strength of a God's descendant creature, or it could be called an ordinary attack. He did not use any skills other than the halo. The skill bar of a God's descendant creature was definitely more luxurious than that of a lord. There were 5-star or even stronger combat skills. Bai Xiaowen was not surprised at all. Bai Xiaowen narrowed his eyes. Unless the Great Lord in front of him did not have any combat skills that could be used. This was very likely. After all, the Great Lord was lodging in Amitabha's body. He was not a complete God's descendant creature. The only combat skills that the Great Lord could use so far was spiritual suggestion, which was a spiritual skill. The others, such as the Abyss Infusion and the Divine Halo, were all auxiliary. The real Amitabha definitely had combat skills that matched his huge body. He would not be so brainless as to smash endlessly. Calm down. The Great Lord isn't as scary as he looks. His resurrection is incomplete without the Eye of Amitabha and the Scale of Amitabha. Let me find his weakness. An azure gold crown appeared on Bai Xiaowen's head, and his eyes seemed to be tainted with a trace of azure-colored mist. Prophet's Crown's additional skill, Insight, activate. Bai Xiaowen's vision suddenly turned black. This was the negative effect of a large amount of mental power pouring out in an instant. It was the same as a person who suddenly stood up after squatting for a long time and felt dizzy due to insufficient blood supply to the brain. A crosshair appeared in Bai Xiaowen's field of vision. When the crosshair was aimed at the Great Lord, the green glow on the Great Lord's body quickly turned red. It felt like a scope in a shooting game. Of course, this process was not easy. Bai Xiaowen was now closer to the Great Lord. Observing a monster the size of a castle from close up, it was very difficult to see its full appearance. Therefore, at this time, he had to use his mental power to scan and extend his mind's field of vision to see the Great Lord's full appearance. The Great Lord's outer skin was azure black on the back, gradually turning dark yellow at the abdomen, and then light yellow. However, under Bai Xiaowen's insight, the entire body turned into a faint pink. The pink color wasn't uniform either. Some areas were darker, which meant that the defense was weaker. This was the weakness of the insight skill. Under normal circumstances, attacking such areas would cause higher damage, and it was easier to trigger a critical hit. Bai Xiaowen focused on finding the darkest area, which was also the biggest weakness. If he attacked an area with an average depth, which was also a common weakness, it would basically be like scratching an itch for the Great Lord, who had thick skin and flesh and was as large as a mountain. It would only be effective if he hit the weakest spot. Soon, Bai Xiaowen made a discovery. There was an area with an extremely dark color. It was so pink that it was red, red that it was purple, and purple that it was black. That area was between the eyes of the snake head and the middle of the Great Lord's body. It was only the size of an ordinary person's fist and was placed in the center of the snake head, which was hundreds of meters in diameter. It was extremely hidden. If not for Bai Xiaowen's mental power and meticulous observation, he really would not have found it. Of the 9 snake heads, only this one has a weakness, and it's purplish black. The other 8 snake heads are all pink, which means that they have no weaknesses. Bai Xiaowen quickly thought of a possibility. Could it be that the Great Lord's consciousness is hidden in the centermost snake head? Bai Xiaowen recalled that the second requirement of the scavenger mission was to destroy the Great Lord's consciousness connector. It seemed that the consciousness connector was in the central snake head. Moreover, in the fierce battle just now, the Great Lord's many snake heads had been smashing down madly. On average, the other 8 heads had smashed down dozens of times each. Only the central head hadn't participated and hadn't moved an inch. This further confirmed Bai Xiaowen's thoughts. Profound insight activated successfully and marked the T weakness. After activating profound insight, Bai Xiaowen's allies, including the 7 lords, were all in Bai Xiaowen's field of vision. He could clearly see the different weaknesses of the Great Lord. The counterattack began. The close combat lords rushed over, swinging their weapons and hacking at the weak areas. Of course, this was not easy because the Great Lord's legs were the strongest parts of his body, and his abdomen was the weak area. The abdomen of snakes and lizards was very close to the ground. Sometimes, they would even drag themselves on the ground. However, the Great Lord's huge body determined that his lower abdomen was very high, no less than 100 meters from the ground. Although the close combat lords had great strength, they did not have the lightness skills of the warriors in the sword song dimension. They could only fight on the ground and attack the strong legs. Occasionally, with the Great Lord's movements, his lower abdomen would be close to the ground. The lords would then aim for the weak area and attack fiercely. Long-range lords were more comfortable fighting. After all, they could attack from a distance. However, it was still very difficult to hit the area above the Great Lord's abdomen directly. The reason was that the Great Lord was terrifyingly tall. It was beyond the range of spells or arrows. It was truly a terrifying body that could reach the horizon. Originally, the lords were no match for God's descendants. From an outsider's point of view, the 7 lords besieging the Great Lord was like 7 ants trying to kill an elephant. Chapter 10:17. Although the 7 lords couldn't do anything to the Great Lord, they had no problem dodging the latter's attacks. The 2 sides fought for a while, and the Great Lord only lost a little HP. One had to know that this was an attack from 7 lords. However, the Great Lord seemed to be impatient. Waste of time, too much of it. 7 ants, I don't need to be hindered by you at all. I just need to destroy the ley line pillar and drown the sea. In the sea, I can easily raise tsunamis, and the power of my every move will be magnified tenfold. Let's see how you can contend with me then. The Great Lord's calculations were correct. After making up his mind, he ignored the 7 lords and walked toward the ley line corridor step by step. No one dared to stop the Great Lord's footsteps. Some soldiers who couldn't dodge in time, whether they were Nagas or humans, were stomped into meat patties by the terrifying foot that was thousands of meters in diameter. They couldn't be more dead. Thud, 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 step by step, it looked slow, but it was unstoppable. Stop him! The Camelot Queen's magic wand whistled in a circle, and a blizzard fell from the sky, covering the Great Lord's huge body. The blizzard's skill could cause an area of continuous deceleration. However, the Great Lord didn't feel anything, and his speed didn't slow down at all. Bai Xiaowen also activated a spell talisman switch, and an imprisonment spell talisman flew out. A ray of blue light entered the Great Lord's body, but it was like a stone sinking into the sea. There was no response. Ahan brandished his giant sword and charged. The light on the giant sword increased greatly, making him look like a god of war in golden armor. However, this charging skill, which used the power of a holy artifact, couldn't even shake the Great Lord's toe. Instead, Ahan's HP fell by a lot, and he retreated. The god's descendant has too high of a priority. The control skills are almost useless, and many of the damage effects are greatly reduced. Bai Xiaowen took a deep breath. His Blood Essence Stone's special effect, the first drop of HP, couldn't even be triggered by the Great Lord, who had just reached full HP. This was the first time he had encountered such a situation. The Seven Lords' aura skills had been fully activated, but they were severely weakened by the Great Lord. Many people despaired. How could they defeat such a terrifying creature? Finally, the Great Lord arrived in front of the leyline pillar. The leyline pillar, which was incomparably thick to ordinary people, was as thin as a sapling in front of the Great Lord. Boom! One of the Great Lord's heads slammed into a pillar of the ley line. The earth trembled as if a small earthquake had occurred. However, the earth vein pillar did not budge. Damn it, losing Harafenson has greatly reduced my efficiency in destroying the earth vein pillars. However, it will only take a little more time. These ants are no threat to me. The Great Lord glanced contemptuously at the seven lords who were chasing after him. Apart from the central head, which didn't move at all, the other 8 heads smashed their heads against the pillars of the earth veins one after another. Boom 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 boom, the earth vein corridor was shaking. The earth vein pillars seemed to be trembling. Above the dome, dust, gravel, and even broken stalactites fell one after another. What to do? What to do? The eyes of the Alliance soldiers were focused on the 7 lords. The gazes of the other 6 lords were focused on Bai Xiaowen's body. Bai Xiaowen sighed. The power of a god's descendant creature had exceeded his imagination. Even though it was only a level 6 god's descendant creature and had lost many combat skills, it was still not something that the 7 lords could fight against. Think about it, could 7 high-level elites kill a level 6 lord? They were 2 templates away. Moreover, the gap between a god's descendant creature and a lord was definitely greater than the gap between a lord and an elite. In the face of absolute strength, the ability to foresee and strategize was just empty talk. Let's retreat. Your Majesty. Bai Xiaowen said with a bitter smile, unless the 7 sacred artifacts are gathered, we can't defeat the Great Lord. If we retreat now, as long as the 6 sacred artifact lords are still here, there's a chance to turn the tables. Queen Camelot nodded solemnly. As a king, she knew better. Moat's great mine, the Dwarf Kingdom, and so many elites of the Alliance army, could only give up. The 7 lords and a small number of leaders could escape through teleportation spells. The price would be heavy, but if they did not leave, the Alliance army would completely lose the possibility of victory. Queen Camelot took out a scroll that exuded an ancient aura. Suddenly, the staff behind her, Azu's prestige, began to glow. Not only her, but the sacred artifacts of the other sacred artifact lords also glowed with the same light. This is... Queen Camelot was a little surprised. This was the first time she had seen such a change in a sacred artifact. Bai Xiaowen's eyes widened. Looks like, we don't have to run anymore. Bai Xiaowen exhaled and smiled. God hasn't abandoned us. At this critical moment, the 7th sacred artifact has finally found its master. Whoosh! Spiritual scan, spirit vision. Bai Xiaowen quickly sensed it. The sacred artifacts of the 6 lords present were like 6 small suns, exuding vigorous divine energy. In the distance, at the entrance of the lay corridor, another small sun was flying over at an astonishing speed. Following Bai Xiaowen's gaze, everyone looked at the entrance of the lay corridor. Ta-ta-ta, the sound of chaotic footsteps could be heard as a pack of wargs rushed out of the tunnel. Behind this pack of wolves, there was a particularly tall and mighty giant wolf. On its back sat a burly orc with a black eyelid cap. Wolf Taming Grandmaster, Roar. The most eye-catching thing was the battle axe in Roar's hand. Just like the sacred artifacts of the 6 sacred artifact lords, the battle axe, Akali's Wrath, was also glowing with a blazing light. Spiritual Realms Rules Prompt Information, 7 Sacred Artifact Combination Skill, Divine Convergence, unlocked. Divine Convergence, passive. All sacred artifact wielders will have base priority +2, and their attacks will deal additional true damage based on their own level *4. Activating Divine Convergence can emit a holy ray that deals fixed 100 true damage to all targets, regardless of friend or foe, in its path and penetrates the target's defense. In an instant, Bai Xiaowen felt a blazing energy enter his body from Mara's Wand of Wisdom. An incomparably comfortable feeling came over him. His base priority increased by 2 points, reaching an astonishing 7 points. He was now on par with the descendants of God. This was also the true meaning of the spiritual realms rules. It allowed the 7 lords to no longer be at a disadvantage at the crucial priority level. Moreover, attacks wielding sacred artifacts would deal additional true damage of 32, level 8 by 4. With the huge increase in priority, these true damages would have 7 points of priority and would ignore some of the Lord's passive defense attributes. Chapter 10:18. The Great Lord's movement stopped. Then, the 18 snake eyes of the 9 heads stared at the 7 sacred artifact overlords at the same time. Then, he saw the light of the sacred artifacts and the rising waves of psionic particles on the bodies of the 7 sacred artifact overlords. The 7 sacred artifacts, a boring legend. Dior C. Kale Bloom, your prophecy that you can defeat me by gathering the 7 sacred artifacts, then give it a try. Don't confuse me with Amitabha. Listening to the rumbling thunder, Bai Xiaowen revealed a smile. You are indeed very powerful. But I'm sorry, it's not a 7 sacred artifact overlords who are fighting against you. To be precise, we are only the tip of the iceberg. What really stands behind us is the will of the entire spirit realm plane. The azure gold crown on his head completely materialized. Voices echoed in Bai Xiaowen's mind. These voices seemed to be spoken by hundreds and thousands of people. The specific words could not be heard clearly, as if thousands of souls were whispering. Along with this voice, a huge amount of spiritual energy poured into Bai Xiaowen's mind. Bai Xiaowen received a notification at the same time. Your Prophet Crown's additional skill, Heroic Soul's Wish, has been unlocked. Heroic Soul's Wish, passive. You have received the help of the remnant heroic souls of the ancient guardian sect's predecessors. Spirit Attribute +20, the power of all your spiritual type skills, including, but not limited to, damage range, control duration, additional effects, etc. Increased by 100%. The effect of the Heroic Soul's Wish was passive and did not need to be activated. Bai Xiaowen narrowed his eyes. The power of spiritual type skills increased by 100%. In his palm, the light of the spell talisman flickered and finally turned into a yellow spell talisman. A ray of yellow light flew out. The Great Lord's huge body made it impossible for him to dodge and was hit by the bewitching spell talisman. The bewitching test failed as expected, but the subsequent stun effect was no longer discounted, and the time was doubled. The reason why it was not discounted was that Bai Xiaowen's basic priority had risen to level 7. Coupled with the 3-star gear of the spell talisman, the total priority of this bewitching spell talisman reached level 10. It was only 1 point away from the spiritual world rules of the awakened plane. The doubling of time was naturally the passive amplification of the heroic soul's wish. For a moment, the Great Lord's 9 heads stopped moving and were stunned for 5 seconds. The other lords rushed up and took advantage of this rare opportunity to besiege him. Queen Camelot's frost spear, Dorothea Goldleaf's sun-chasing arrow, Bai Xiaowen's light of wisdom, Arhan's sword of sanction, Ruer's axe of savagery, the 7 sacred tool overlords all displayed their ultimate skills. Even the Snake Mother was brandishing her 8 arms and launching multiple attacks. Her 8 scimitars crazily rained down attacks. However, magic runes lit up on the surface of the Great Lord's body. Most of the damage from the various overlords' attacks was negated by the magic runes. Only the true damage from holy fusion managed to penetrate the defense of the magic runes. However, these true damages didn't even tickle the Great Lord, who had 200 points of constitution. The Great Lord quickly regained his senses. He shook his head and snorted. "Is this your full attack? You ants! Rumble!" He stomped down, and the various lords hurriedly dodged. However, the shockwave from the huge foot still knocked down a few melee lords and caused them minor damage. Fortunately, the melee lords were all thick-skinned and fleshy types. They hurriedly got up and fled, avoiding the follow-up trampling attack. Queen Camelot's expression was solemn. This monster's body is protected by very complicated magic runes. Before the energy of these magic runes disappears, I'm afraid it will be difficult for us to cause effective damage. The Great Lord said proudly, "This layer of magic defensive runes was set up by me to make up for the missing scales on Amotoa's body. So what if I don't have the defensive power granted by the scales? Before the effect of the defensive runes declines, my defensive power is even stronger than Amotoa's at his peak. A defensive rune that isolates all damage except for true damage," Bai Xiaowen muttered to himself and suddenly said, "I understand the significance of the heroic soul's wish." The Great Lord had the defensive rune, so the enhancement in the power of spiritual type skills granted by the heroic soul's wish lost most of its meaning. Even if it was a spell that increased damage by 100%, it would have no effect in front of the defensive rune. The enhancement in damage spells was almost zero. Then what about auxiliary spells? The Azure Gold Prophet's crown shone, and Bai Xiaowen activated Insight again. This time, the vision brought by the Insight skill was clearer. It could already achieve the effect of X-ray. Not only did the Great Lord have weaknesses on the surface of his body, but even the blood vessels, bones, and so on inside his body showed weaknesses. Moreover, many of the blood vessels were connected and aligned from the instep of his feet to the brain area in the center of his head. The purplish-black light that was specially marked by the Insight skill was very obvious in a sea of pink. This is the hint given to me by the rules of the spiritual world. At this point, if I still can't think of a way to break out of this situation, then I'll be ashamed of the super brain given by the Eye of Evolution. Bai Xiaowen opened his eyes. "All sacred weapon overlords, activate the sacred weapon with me and launch the holy ray." The other 6 sacred weapon overlords did not hesitate at all. They quickly stood beside Bai Xiaowen. The sacred weapons flashed. Each sacred weapon split into a beam of light. The 7 beams of light completed the convergence in the air, converging into a dazzling ball of light. This ball of light contained a terrifying amount of energy. The 6 sacred weapon overlords gave Bai Xiaowen the lead. Bai Xiaowen controlled the ball of light and aimed it at the Great Lord's soul, the origin of the purplish-black blood vessel. Holy Ray, launch! It ignored any defense and dealt 100 points of true damage. With a loud boom, the Great Lord's soul was penetrated. There was no blood spurting out. The wound was purplish-black, like a dried bloodstain. A large purplish-black hole. Charge! We have to charge into Amitava's body. Bai Xiaowen shouted loudly. Then, he was the first to charge toward the wound on the Great Lord's soul. At the same time, he activated the deterrence skill. The Great Lord's original movements were frozen. The purplish-black hole on the sole of his foot was also stunned on the spot. The other 6 sacred weapon overlords hesitated for a moment before following one after another. Even the Snake Mother, Galilala, rushed forward. They followed the blood vessels and entered Amitava's body to destroy the Great Lord. This idea seemed unrealistic, but combined with the Great Lord's huge body, it was so imaginative. The Great Lord was like a mountain. The crisscrossing blood vessels in his body were like tunnels of various sizes in the belly of the mountain. Bai Xiaowen blasted open the mountain and entered the tunnels. He could blow up the mountain from the inside. Chapter 10:19. Time was of the essence. Only the 8 lords, including the Snake Mother, charged into the blood vessels of the Great Lord's feet. Soon, the time for intimidation was up. The Great Lord became frantic, constantly waving his head and stomping his feet. The terrifying wind pressure and powerful shockwaves forced the surrounding allied army and snake warriors to flee. They couldn't get close, let alone charge into the Great Lord's body with the 8 lords. The war in the outside world was still ongoing, but it was much less intense than before. Many people were watching the outcome of the battle between the 8 lords and the Great Lord. This was a confrontation between the top existences on both sides, and to a certain extent, it would determine the final direction of the war. The blood vessels were densely wrinkled and difficult to traverse. The thick blood vessel Bai Xiaowen had chosen was several meters in diameter. Under normal circumstances, it could accommodate many people walking side by side. However, Amitabha's remains had been dead for a long time, and the blood vessels in his body had contracted to a certain extent. Most of the blood vessels were still open, which was the result of the powerful blood qi of a god descendant. As for the blood, there was basically no blood flowing. Inside the blood vessels, there were purple-black scabs and blood clots everywhere. Fortunately, the 8 lords advanced quickly. When they encountered blocked blood vessels, they could directly open them. The walls of the blood vessels were very soft and tough. Just from the thickness of the blood vessels, one could imagine how powerful Amitabha's blood qi had been when he was alive. To be able to support such a powerful blood qi circulation, the blood vessel walls needed to be tough enough. Stepping on the blood vessel walls, the soles of their feet would sink slightly. Moreover, the Great Lord was currently violently twisting. The 8 lords were constantly in an unbalanced state. One moment they were upside down, and the next moment they were thrown sideways on the blood vessel walls. This caused a certain amount of trouble for their advancement. Fortunately, the 8 lords were astonishingly powerful. This bit of trouble couldn't stop them. After advancing a few hundred meters, the unbalanced frenzy had greatly weakened. We should be in the blood vessels of the legs now. We've left the blood vessels of the feet, which have changed the most. Bai Xiaowen said in a low voice, after another 1 or 2 kilometers, we should be free of the external imbalance for the time being. All the lords understood that the range of movement in the legs was naturally weaker than in the feet. If they advanced another 2,000 meters, they would reach the blood vessels in the torso and even enter the Great Lord's internal organs. Naturally, the torso's range of movement would be the lowest. However, the lords also understood that if they continued to climb up from the torso to the blood vessels in the neck, the effects of the external imbalance would be even more violent than now. After all, the Great Lord's slender neck was the most agile part of his body. I can't imagine that we've taken the initiative to get into this big guy's body, Beast King Wer said. That's right. If I had a choice, I would rather die than come in here. The female elf Dorothea Goldleaf wrinkled her nose and looked at the black blood scab in front of them in disgust. It was rare for her to reach an agreement with the orc leader. We have no choice. For the sake of the Dark Tide continent, we have to do this. Queen Camelot said. Unite as one. Captain Harold Atherton's voice was as firm as a rock as his face. He took the lead and led the way. Bai Xiaowen had a flash of understanding. It seemed that after defeating the Great Lord and wiping out the Nagas, the Dark Tide Plain would be unified. Although there were still differences between countries, the high-level leaders of the countries had put down their barriers after fighting side by side in the apocalypse. Without disputes, the factions would no longer exist. Naturally, the unification would be complete. Suddenly, Bai Xiaowen's eyes flashed. Be careful. There's an enemy. The lords were all surprised. How could there be an enemy inside the Great Lord's body? Soon, they saw the enemy's appearance. It was a mass of purple-black spherical objects. Each of them was sticky and crawling in the blood vessels like half-solidified blood. Bai Xiaowen quickly used insight. Blood of Amotoa, Boss Level 7, Race, Mutant, Attributes, STR50, DX50, Con50, WIL0, Skill 1, Devour. Amotoa's blood pounces on a life form and attempts to devour the target, dealing 70 magic damage per second until the target escapes or dies. Skill 2, Corruption, Passive. Amotoa's blood will turn into a puddle of corrupted blood after death. Stacks of corruption on all life forms in the area, 1 stack per second. Each stack of corruption will cause the target to receive 100 magic damage per second for 5 seconds. Skill 3, Split, Passive. Amotoa's blood will split into 2 pieces of Amotoa's blood when its HP is reduced to 50% or lower. Each piece of Amotoa's blood will inherit 50% of the parent's attributes in all skills, excluding the splitting skill. Skill 4, Tracking, Passive. Amotoa's blood will pursue the target at a constant speed until the target dies or the Amotoa's blood dies. After splitting, the target will be redetermined. Skill 5, Blood of the Gods Level 2, gain 400 extra HP and 40% toughness. The target's template and level were lower than his, so it was not surprising that insight could see through it. However, Bai Xiaowen was still shocked by how troublesome Amotoa's blood was. Kill them on the spot. Be careful that they will split once. Also, avoid the rotten blood after they die. Bai Xiaowen tried his best to summarize the characteristics of these monsters in one sentence. As for the Devourer skill, it was actually very simple for the lords. There was no need to say more. The troublesome part was the 3 passive skills. These blood clots crawl like snails. Can't we just avoid them and walk away? A lord asked. Bai Xiaowen shook his head. Amotoa's blood had a tracking skill. As long as they did not die, they would continue to track their target to the ends of the earth. Although they crawled slowly, they were always at a constant speed and were not affected by external disturbances. If the lords ignored them and continued to move forward, they would only be able to shake them off temporarily. Who knew if there were more powerful monsters in front? If they had no choice but to fight, and a group of Amotoa's blood aberrations caught up from behind, it would be fatal. Therefore, the safest way was to not be afraid of trouble and clear out this group of aberrations. The only good news was that there were 8 lords on Bai Xiaowen's side. They did not need to expend too much effort to deal with these leader-level aberrations. Under Bai Xiaowen's command, the close combat lords were responsible for dealing with the complete Amotoa's blood. Basically, the violent lords such as Ahan and Basaka could cause the Amotoa's blood to split into 2 with 1 or 2 attacks. After that, the close combat lords changed their target and did not attack the small monsters that had split into 2. The small monsters were killed by long-range attacks. This way, the close combat lords could avoid the area of rotten blood that appeared after their deaths. Chapter 10-20. A group of leader-tier aberrated monsters that looked difficult to deal with, and were in fact very difficult to deal with, were eliminated by the 8 powerful suzerains. This was normal. The suzerains, especially the 7 holy weapon suzerains, were no longer suzerains in the ordinary sense, they were in the state of holy fusion and were stronger than the average suzerain. Carefully avoiding the contaminated areas left behind by Amitava's blood, the suzerains continued to advance. The blood vessels that the 8 of them advanced through were connected to other blood vessels. In the eyes of the others, it was a crisscrossing crossroads. Fortunately, the main blood vessels were still relatively clear. Perhaps it was because they had reached the legs, but the main blood vessels became wider as they walked. After walking for about 1,000 meters, there are 3 identical blood vessels in front of us. They are all of the same thickness. Which one should we take? Harold, the head knight, asked. Bai Xiaowen closed his eyes slightly. With the help of spirit vision, he suddenly opened his spiritual scan and expanded in an instant. In Amitava's body, countless complicated blood vessels formed a network of meridians. They were all reflected in Bai Xiaowen's spirit vision. "Go this way." Bai Xiaowen pointed out the direction. The 8 suzerains did not hesitate. They followed the prophet's instructions and stepped into the blood vessels on the right. "We have entered Amitava's abdominal blood vessels," Bai Xiaowen said. "I can feel that the vibration outside has weakened a lot," Dorothea said. "However, there are many crossroads of the same thickness in the blood vessels in front of us. They are not as clear as the main blood vessels in the legs at the beginning." The Beast King Rur saw the problem. "It's okay. We have the prophet's guidance." A smile appeared on Queen Camelot's serious face. There were more than 10 million blood vessels in Amitava's body. To find the correct path in these complicated blood vessels, the prophet's ability was indeed inseparable. Fortunately, Bai Xiaowen also had this ability. With his super brain and spirit vision, he had already constructed a 3-dimensional image of the blood vessels in his mind. He did not need to activate his spiritual scan again and again to find the correct path. This saved a lot of time for the Allied forces. Along the way, they encountered 2 more groups of aberrated monsters, Amitava's blood. The 8 suzerains easily eliminated them. Bai Xiaowen felt a tinge of regret. Perhaps it was because these aberrations did not have souls. After killing them, his black soul stone did not absorb any soul essence. The growth rate on it did not change. Otherwise, with so many commander-tier monsters, it would be a great supplement for the black soul stone. The group of people arrived at the thickest area of the blood vessel passageway. The passageway here could already accommodate 8 people walking side by side, and there was still room to spare. Through the vaguely visible blood vessel valves, everyone could see a huge sphere in front of them that was connected to many giant blood vessels. Some of the giant blood vessels went upwards, while others went downwards. Everyone was in one of the giant blood vessels. This should be Amitava's heart. In Bai Xiaowen's mind, he had already built a 3-dimensional model of Amitava's blood vessels. He said slowly, "The 9 ascending blood vessels should be connected to Amitava's 9 heads. The Great Lord is hiding in the central skull. What should we do now?" Ahan's question was very concise. Bai Xiaowen said, "Find the Great Lord's hiding place and destroy the consciousness connector it uses to control Amitava's body. But before that, we need to do one more thing." Bai Xiaowen pointed to the other 8 ascending giant blood vessels. "Enter the location of the other 8 heads and see something called the Earth's core. There are 2 in total." "Earth's core? What's that? How come I've never heard of it?" Beast King Rur asked. Bai Xiaowen said, "That's a special treasure seized by the Great Lord after destroying the leyline pillar. According to the ancient records of the Guardian sect, Amitava can resonate with the Earth's core in the leyline pillar, then destroy the leyline pillar, seize the Earth's core, and swallow it into its own head. After the Guardian sect sages killed Amitava, they cut off its head, found the Earth's core, and used it to reshape the Earth. This knowledge was obtained from the dusty Guardian sect's temple inscriptions." After a pause, Bai Xiaowen said, "At present, the Great Lord has destroyed 2 leyline corridors. One is the Calchino Republic, located in the Bonus Mountains, the other is the Elf Kingdom, located in the Amusha Forest. If we want to reshape these 2 lands, we need the Earth's core." "Prophet, I think we can focus on something," Beast King Rur said in a deep voice. "First, go to the central head and kill the Great Lord. Then, go to the other 8 heads separately and find the Earth's core." As soon as this was said, many lords expressed their agreement. Bai Xiaowen said with a wry smile, "No, we'd better get this done before the Great Lord dies. At present, Amitava is actually just a pile of rotten flesh. It was the Great Lord's descent and resurrection ritual that gave it a new vitality. If the Great Lord dies, Amitava's remains will be out of control and will become a pile of debris again. At that time, it's hard to guarantee whether the Earth's core can be found." Dorothea Goldleaf immediately said, "Okay, let's do as Lord Prophet said." Snake Mother Galilala also nodded and showed a look of agreement. However, the other lords had different expressions and were hesitant. Bai Xiaowen understood the thoughts of these people. The Calchino Republic had no sacred lords, so no one spoke for their interests. Except for the Elf Kingdom, which also needed to reshape the land, the other 6 sacred lords came from countries that had not been affected by the disaster. Naturally, they were not as anxious as Dorothea. Everyone, the water level of the sea has been rising. If the land is not reshaped, then the sea will not recede. The land that was submerged by the sea will not be able to see the light of day again. This kind of rainy weather will not improve. Bai Xiaowen pointed in the direction of the sky, which was actually the blood vessel wall, and continued, if you want to restore the geography and climate of the continent before the Great Lord's invasion, you must first find the Earth's core. As soon as this was said, all the sacred lords had no other thoughts. In order to save time, the 8 lords divided into 8 groups. In addition to the giant blood vessel in the central head, each of the 8 ascending blood vessels was arranged for a lord to explore. Bai Xiaowen said that he was unable to determine the specific location of the 2 Earth's cores. The Great Lord seemed to have some kind of ability to interfere with spiritual detection. Early in the battle with the Naga's underwater base, Bai Xiaowen suffered from this kind of spiritual interference. Therefore, to be safe, the 8 lords split up to ensure that the 2 Earth's cores were found first. Chapter 1021. Soon, the 8 suzerains were each assigned an ascending giant blood vessel and headed to the other 8 heads of the Great Lord, excluding the central head, to collect Earth cores. Be careful. The 8 of them waved their hands, and their figures disappeared into the ascending giant blood vessels. After a while, a figure with 8 arms and a slender snake tail slithered out from one of the ascending giant blood vessels. Snake Mother Jaglila. She looked around and cautiously activated her spirit scan. After confirming that there was no one around, she looked at the 9 ascending giant blood vessels. Then, a strange look appeared in Snake Mother Jaglila's eyes. We've finally reached this step. Sorry, little prophet. Jaglila swam directly toward the central giant blood vessel. Her target was the Great Lord's central head. Moving forward in the giant blood vessels was not an easy task. In addition to the Great Lord's neck constantly twisting, causing him to be in a constant state of imbalance, there were also some aberrations of Amitabha's blood that interfered with his progress. After Snake Mother moved forward several hundred meters, the walls of the blood vessels kept shaking as if there was an earthquake. This meant that the twisting of the Great Lord's neck was extremely violent. Snake Mother stopped, gritted her teeth, and said, "Your Excellency. I know you can hear me. You're at the end of your rope now. I'm the only one who can save you. Let's not waste each other's time." The shaking stopped. A rumbling sound sounded directly in Snake Mother's heart. This was the transmission of the Great Lord's spirit, but it seemed to be somewhat intermittent. "What do you want, traitor? I've never betrayed you because I've never been loyal to you," Snake Mother said sternly. "Great Lord, have you become so weak? I'm alone, and you don't even dare to meet me? If so, how can you resist the attacks of the 7 sacred artifact overlords in your body? We need an open and honest negotiation." "Humph," the Great Lord snorted coldly. "I'll stop the shaking of the central head. Come over as soon as possible." Snake Mother was somewhat excited and also somewhat fearful. It seemed that the Great Lord's long-distance telepathic transmission was still quite exhausting, so he wanted to talk face to face. At this time, the Great Lord was really at the end of his rope. He could only gamble on Snake Mother's negotiation. Otherwise, with the 7 overlords of the holy artifacts gathered together, he would have no chance of winning. The face-to-face meeting was part of the Snake Dowager's plan. She felt the tremors stop and immediately accelerated. There was a crawling Amitabha's blood aberration in front of them, slowly blocking their path. Snake Matriarch said loudly, "Great Lord, chase away your minions." "Unfortunately, they have no intelligence and are not under my control." The Great Lord's voice was a little weak. After a pause, he said, "But I can help you get there faster." The snake mother suddenly felt a tremor in the walls of the blood vessels below her. The giant blood vessels that were originally ascending rapidly lowered their height and became descending blood vessels. This was easy to understand. The Great Lord must have made the central head lower its head. This way, the original upward passage would become a downward passage with a higher incline, saving the snake dowager the effort of climbing. "Don't worry about those aberrations. Just come over." "They can't reach my control room," the Great Lord transmitted. Looking at the descending blood vessels that were slanted 45 degrees, the snake dowager breathed a sigh of relief. However, when she heard the words control room, a layer of haze flashed across her eyes and then quickly disappeared. The snake dowager suddenly accelerated and rushed toward the central head at a speed that was close to sprinting. At the same time, she said loudly, "You have to make sure that the other 8 heads are constantly vibrating. Do your best to buy time for our meeting." The Great Lord did not respond, but the snake dowager did not need his response. Without the interference of the outside world and the need to care about the demon blood aberration, Snake Dowager quickly arrived at the central skull, which was the control room where the Great Lord was, the central skull cavity of Amitabha. Snake God above, the first scene that she saw shocked the Snake Dowager. What did she see? A brain with a diameter of hundreds of meters. It looked like a giant hill. The cerebral cortex trembled slightly like a meat jelly, and there were also complicated gully circuits. "You're here." A low, slightly feminine voice sounded in the Snake Dowager's ears. The Snake Dowager was shocked and instinctively wanted to activate a spiritual scan. However, in this brain cavity, her spiritual scanning ability was suppressed to an extremely low level. It could not even cover a radius of 10 meters. No need to scan. A humanoid creature with the characteristics of an octopus crawled out of the giant brain sulcus. This humanoid monster had 4 limbs, but the limbs at the end had degenerated into octopus tentacles. In addition, there were slender tentacles on its back that were connected to the giant brain. As it moved, the slender fleshy tentacles lengthened accordingly. In terms of facial features, this humanoid monster had no nose. A giant single eye occupied most of its face, and its mouth was slightly protruding, like the mouth of an octopus. There was no doubt that this humanoid monster was the Great Lord who had occupied Amitabha's remains and was stirring up trouble in the Black Tide continent. The Great Lord sized up the Snake Dowager and said, "In the control room, the scanning ability of spiritual detection will be severely suppressed. This is the brain domain of the god's descendant, Amitabha. Although it has been dead for a long time, it still has a powerful residual power." The Snake Dowager nodded. The Snake God is an incomparably powerful existence. It's not strange that it has such a remarkable ability. He, Snake God, remarkable ability. The Great Lord revealed a strange smile, then said, "All right, tell me why you're here. If you can't satisfy me, I'll consider getting rid of a traitor like you first." The Snake Dowager subconsciously said, "You still have the ability to kill me in your current state?" The Great Lord's vertical pupils suddenly widened, and a beam of mental power that was visible to the naked eye shot out. The Snake Dowager hurriedly dodged. The spiritual ray brushed past her snake hair and left a deep hole in the hard skull beside her. Amitabha's skull was so hard that the Great Lord's spiritual ray could penetrate it. If it had hit a life form, the consequences would have been obvious. Most importantly, the Snake Dowager knew that the Great Lord had the ability to hit her. For someone like the Great Lord, reaching level 10 of meditation was the most basic. Perhaps it was even higher, and adjusting the trajectory of spells would be the easiest. In other words, although the Great Lord's physical body was connected to the giant brain, resulting in limited mobility, his attack power was still not to be underestimated. "You don't have much time," the Great Lord reminded her. "I'm not in a good mood, so my patience is limited." "All right, I'll talk." The Snake Dowager took a deep breath. "Great Lord, I want to make a deal with you." Chapter 1022. Snake Mother Gaglila spoke very quickly. Obviously, you have already failed. The United Army camp has already gathered 7 sacred weapon overlords. They are now searching for the core of the other heads. Once they are done, they will gather here. Under the combined attack of the 7 sacred weapon overlords, you will definitely perish. The Great Lord did not deny this point. He only said with a hint of indignation, "Damn it, if I could carry the sacred relic myself, I wouldn't have to leave it to that useless Sean, and it wouldn't have been taken away by the human prophet. Why can't you carry the sacred weapon yourself?" Snake Mother was curious. The Great Lord said, "This is a restriction placed on me by the will of the dimension." What do you think the sacred weapon is? It is an extension of the will of the dimension. If I carry the sacred weapon with me, it is equivalent to giving the will of the dimension a chance to directly influence me. Snake Mother nodded. She finally understood why the Great Lord had given the crucial sacred weapon, the meat-cleaving axe, to the Shuren Overlord for safekeeping. Some people might say that the Great Lord could hide the sacred weapon. However, thinking about Bai Xiaowen's prophecy ability and the spiritual realm's rules, no matter where it was hidden, it could not escape Bai Xiaowen's prophecy. It would eventually be found. Moreover, it could be obtained without a high-intensity battle. Snake Mother could feel the Great Lord's current mood. Although he was powerful, in this dimension, he was an enemy of the entire world. There were restrictions everywhere. "Alright, I admit that my plan has failed. Now, tell me the details of your deal," the Great Lord said. "I hope that you can voluntarily remove the control of the Snake God, Lord Amitabha." Snake Mother said, "I will perform a forbidden ritual to resurrect Lord Amitabha. Once he is resurrected, he will be able to control his body freely. It will be easy to expel the 7 sacred weapon overlords. Moreover, he will be able to fully utilize the Snake God's power and win this war." "What can I get in return?" the Great Lord asked. "You can live," Snake Mother said. Do you think I will truly die?" The Great Lord sneered. "What is in front of you now is only an incarnation of me, a carrier. My true body is beyond your comprehension. Even if this carrier dies, I will only lose the medium of descent. I will not die at all." Snake Mother was shocked. The Great Lord said, "My goal in coming to the Dark Tide plane is to corrupt this plane into my territory. In order to achieve this goal, I've paid a huge price. Now, I'm willing to cooperate with you and take the initiative to remove the consciousness control over Amitabha's remains. However, you must ensure the safety of this medium and find a new host for me at the right time." "A new host?" Snake Mother Galilila repeated. "That's right. Among the 7 sacred weapon overlords, apart from the Prophet Dior C. Kale Bloom, the other 6 fit my requirements. It would be best if it was Queen Camelot," the Archlord said. "You still haven't given up and want to make a comeback," the Snake Mother said. "That's right. The premise of my cooperation with you is to preserve this opportunity to start all over again," the Great Lord said coldly. "What about you? What choice do you have? If you want to resurrect your god, you have to take the appropriate risks." The Snake Dowager did not hesitate for too long and readily said, "I agree. Sorry, I don't believe in empty promises. You have to let me plant the seed of consciousness." The Great Lord said, "If you go back on your word, you will have to pay a heavy price. However, this is the only way to gain my trust." The Snake Dowager frowned. "What is the seed of consciousness?" "It's a seed formed by a wisp of my spiritual power. You can understand it as a secret activation spell. It will be triggered when the conditions are met. And the condition I set is for you to go back on your word. Once the seed of consciousness is triggered, it will completely destroy your consciousness and turn you into an idiot. Of course, for the seed of consciousness to take root in your mind, you must have no consciousness of resistance and accept it on your own accord," the Great Lord explained. Seeing the Snake Dowager's hesitation, the Great Lord added fuel to the fire. "Hurry up and decide. Although I can't detect the location of the 7 sacred weapon overlords, they should be here soon. I'm willing to accept." The Snake Dowager made up her mind. The deal is made. The Great Lord smiled. To him, it was naturally a suitable deal to have a chance of turning the tables in a situation where he was certain to lose. Soon, the Great Lord planted the seed of consciousness in the Snake Dowager. There was no need to elaborate on the process. Next, I will remove my control over Amitabha's body. Remember to activate the resurrection ritual. The Great Lord used his tentacles to roughly wrap around the slender tentacles on his back and tore them off one by one. These slender tentacles were extremely tough, but under the Great Lord's control, they slackened like aged vines and were easily torn apart by the Great Lord. The Snake Dowager grunted in agreement and hurriedly took out items that exuded an ancient aura. There were black feathers, viscous liquid, medicinal herbs that exuded a rotting aura. In the center of all these strange items was a small statue of a 9-headed snake. It was impossible to tell what material it was made of. The Great Lord glanced at the 9-headed snake statue and snorted. So you have Amitabha's life image. No wonder you're confident in reviving it. Are you going to guide Amitabha's consciousness, which is wandering in the sea of stars, into its brain? I can't hide anything from your excellency, the Snake Dowager said respectfully. Then, she began the ritual and murmured an ancient incantation. Suddenly, the Great Lord's expression changed. He looked at the giant blood vessel that connected to the skull cavity. Who is it? Come out. The Great Lord immediately understood what was going on after he blurted out those words. He suddenly let out a sigh. It's over. There's no chance. Footsteps sounded. 7 lords in a row, each holding a holy weapon that emitted a brilliant light, entered the skull cavity one after another. Let's end this evil ritual as soon as possible. Queen Camelot waved Azuz's authoritative staff, and a ball of orbs that exuded a frosty aura spun out. It rushed toward the Snake Dowager, Caglila, who was presiding over the ritual. Although the Great Lord knew that he couldn't do it, he still wanted to struggle. He widened his only eye, and a beam of mental power shot out. The target was that frost orb. However, Harold Atherton rushed forward. A mirror-like silver light flashed on the surface of the hidden sword shield, and the psychic energy beam was reflected back at Harold. The Great Lord hurriedly dodged. Commander Harold also suffered some damage. His strong body was knocked back a few steps, but it was no longer a big deal. The howling cold wind blew, and the frost orb exploded in front of Caglila. Chapter 1023. After the Jewel of Frost exploded, fine ice shards scattered in all directions like shrapnel from a high-explosive grenade. Moreover, they were more powerful than shrapnel because the ice shards not only contained powerful explosive kinetic energy but also inherent freezing power. The Snake Dowager screamed. Her first reaction was not to protect herself, but to pick up the Hydra figurine. But it was too late. Together with the ritual item, Jaglela was hit by the ice shards and was temporarily frozen. After all, she was a lord. In just a second, Jaglela broke free from the frozen state. A crack bloomed from within. Then, the frost wrapped around her body shattered, and she regained her freedom. However, Jaglela's expression was one of horror and helplessness. She screamed, "No!" A beam of light emitting a scorching aura hit the frozen Hydra figurine. The light of wisdom automatically transformed into a flame attack. Ice and fire collided. The Hydra figurine exploded into pieces without any suspense. Without the medium, the ritual naturally failed. Jaglela's expression instantly became very terrifying. She almost gritted her teeth and spat out a name. Dior. Sea Kale Bloom. Bai Xiaowen tilted his head. I'm sorry, Miss Jaglela. I can't let you resurrect Amitabha. The Black Tie continent is now riddled with holes. It can't withstand the torment of this legendary monster again. The Snake Dowager was indeed the Snake Dowager. She took a deep breath and calmed herself down. You have been suspecting me? Why? Bai Xiaowen said, to be honest, I have always trusted you. Even when the coalition fleet was almost wiped out by the Great Lord's surprise attack, even when I attacked the base of the Nagas and was ambushed. I have never doubted your loyalty. Then, when did you start suspecting me? From this battle. Well, to be exact, from the moment we entered Amitabha's body. The Snake Dowager thought for a moment and lowered her eyelids. I understand. I took the initiative to follow you 7 sacred weapon lords and broke into Lord Amitabha's body. This aroused your suspicion. Bai Xiaowen nodded slightly. That's right. In my impression, you have always acted wisely to protect yourself. Whether it was submitting to the Great Lord at the beginning, contacting me through the Lobstermen, or taking the initiative to join and support me in destroying the Naga's base, the premise was the safety of you and the Naga tribe. After a pause, Bai Xiaowen said, at that time, we used holy convergence to penetrate the Great Lord's body defense. Right now, danger lurks in every corner of Amitabha's body. The 7 of us sacred weapon overlords have no choice but to go in and fight. Why did you take the initiative to enter? This doesn't match your style of staying away from danger and not betting on your own life. When a person acts differently from their previous mode of action, it is often not a whim, but a deeper purpose, Bai Xiaowen said. In addition, do you remember when the 8 of us were at the heart of Amitabha, when I said that we should find the core of the planet first? The other lords were puzzled, but you were the first to show agreement. Although you only nodded slightly, I had been quietly observing you, so I caught this small movement. Bai Xiaowen said with a smile, many times, subconscious small movements can reflect a person's inner world. At this point, there was no need to explain further. Under the surveillance of the spiritual vision, Bai Xiaowen discovered that the Snake Dowager was heading to the central vascular channel alone. He secretly informed the other sacred weapon lords to regroup and quietly followed. The basic priority of the sacred weapon lords was as high as 7 points, and they were already at the level of the descendants of God. With the Camelot Queen and Bai Xiaowen's mental power barrier, even though the Snake Dowager was also a spiritual type lord, she could not discover the 7 people following behind her. In addition, the Great Lord was in the cranial chamber and was disturbed by the residual power of Amitabha's brain, so he could not spread out his mental tentacles. Similarly, he could not discover the 7 people following him. It was not until the 7 people came near the cranial chamber and eavesdropped enough content that the Great Lord discovered them when they removed the mental power barrier and revealed themselves. The explanation ends here. Lady Jagalila, we spent a period of friendly alliance together because we had a common enemy, the Great Lord. Now that the Great Lord is facing defeat, we have become enemies. But I don't feel guilty because you betrayed the alliance first, Bai Xiaowen said. Do you have anything else to say? The Great Lord had already reconnected the broken mental tentacles. He gritted his teeth and shouted angrily, don't think that you have the advantage in numbers. Jagalila, resist with me. Even if we die, we will make the enemy pay a heavy price. The Snake Dowager was silent for a while and said, I have nothing to say, Dior the Prophet. You have destroyed the life image of the snake god. Only your head can atone for your sins. 8 arms suddenly spread open, and the Snake Dowager took the initiative to rush toward the sacred weapon lord. Like a whirlwind, the 8 weapons slashed wildly. The Great Lord also released his divine power ray to cover the Snake Dowager's attack. It had to be said that the Snake Dowager was still very strong. Her 8 arms, which were gifted with a terrifying attack speed, were stacked, and every slash was accompanied by high magic damage based on mental power. Unlike the agility-type warriors who relied on critical hits, Jagalila's attack was special effects, but her output was more stable and terrifying. In addition, she had the petrification aura, which could slow down and restrict the enemy. After accumulating a certain number of layers, it could also make the enemy temporarily lose the ability to resist. However, Jagalila's and the Great Lord's resistance was destined to be futile. The 7 sacred weapon lords were too strong. The 7 sacred weapon lords were not weak to begin with, let alone when they were in the state of the combination technique, holy fusion. Just the basic priority +2 was enough to offset most of the restrictive effects of Jagalila's petrification aura, not to mention the true damage that came with the attacks. The halos of the 7 sacred weapon overlords were not discounted for Jaglaila. Harold's hidden sword shield transformed into a giant shield of light energy, blocking Jaglila's storm-like slashes. He did not take a single step back. Queen Carmelo's frost spear easily pierced through Jagalila's chest. Although it was not fatal, the additional freezing and slowing effects were very fatal. Ahan activated Sword of Sanction, and a big sword with brilliant lights slashed down from the sky. Jagalila was unable to dodge, and her whole body was bathed in blood. She even coughed out a mouthful of blood. Amidst the heavy footsteps, Barbarian Basaka leaped above Jagalila's head. His bone-piercing hammer came crashing down, smashing 2 of Jagalila's right arms into mush. Fortunately, Basaka's attack intent was too obvious, giving Jagalila a brief chance to dodge. Otherwise, if her vital parts were hit on the top of her head, she would have died. However, there was still Dorothea's sun-chasing arrow and Roar's wild axe. Bai Xiaowen's wisdom aura constantly restricted Jagalila's ability to cast spells. In the end, Jagalila fell. If not for the Great Lord desperately protecting her, she would have died even faster. My tribe will survive. These were Jagalila's last words. A dark gold treasure chest appeared in Bai Xiaowen's vision. With complicated feelings, Bai Xiaowen picked up the dark gold treasure chest. Following that, the 7 sacred weapon overlords turned their gazes to the Lord. Chapter 1024. Seeing the Snake Mother's miserable state and the 7 sacred artifact overlords' malicious gazes, the Great Lord felt immense pressure. However, he didn't despair. Instead, he desperately shot out divine power rays while roaring, "You can't kill me. I'm immortal. I can be reborn here." The 7 sacred artifact overlords responded by ganging up on him. Overlord Harold, who held a hidden sword and shield, was the main tank. The 2 violent overlords, Ahan and Basaka, were the DPS and secondary tanks. Beast King Roar's Mount Wolf could block small skills. Golden Leaf was the ADC, Bai Xiaowen was the support, and Queen Camelot was the magic DPS. Bai Xiaowen found it quite interesting. It seemed that when the spiritual realm's rules designed the 7 sacred artifacts, they were used as a powerful overlord team to suppress the Demon King. The Great Lord's defeat wasn't unjustified. He was targeted. Soon, the 7 overlords achieved the first kill of the Great Lord. The Great Lord's corpse was lying on the ground of the cranial cavity, but visible waves of spiritual energy were flowing into his corpse. "Something's wrong," Queen Camelot said. "Looks like there's still work to be done." Bai Xiaowen also stopped smiling. After only a few minutes, the Great Lord's corpse on the ground stood up again, and his HP and MP were full. "I told you, you can't kill me. I'm an immortal existence. You can only seal me," the Great Lord said loudly. "I don't believe there's an immortal existence in this world." Ahan gritted his teeth and slashed out with great force. The sacred artifact overlords stepped forward and continued to gang up on him. Not long after, the Great Lord became a corpse again, and even his head was chopped off. This time, he was even more arrogant. He lay on the ground without resurrecting. On his severed head, the octopus mouth opened and closed, and a buzzing voice sounded again. "I told you, I'm immortal." Basaka hammered down heavily, and the Great Lord's head turned into minced meat. Beast King Roar chopped repeatedly with his meat-cutting axe, chopping the Great Lord's headless corpse into 7 or 8 pieces. If it were an ordinary life form, it would have been dead long ago. However, the Great Lord's head, which was in a state of meat paste, slowly recovered as if it was filled with air. His severed body also pieced itself back together. At this moment, the sacred weapon overlords were at their wits' end. They all looked at Bai Xiaowen. "How do we deal with him? Are we really going to seal it?" Dorothea asked. "No," Bai Xiaowen said, shaking his head. "If we seal it, we'll be leaving behind an unstable factor, which is exactly what this guy wants. The way I see it, The Great Lord is a monster that specializes in mind control and mind influence. If he corrupts the guardian of the seal, he might rise from the ashes. After a pause, Bai Xiaowen continued, this guy has been hinting at us to seal him. I guess that's what he's planning. The Great Lord's single eye glared angrily, a hint of viciousness flashing through it. Dior? Kill Bloom, don't go too far. You're not a native of the Black Tide Plain. Aren't you afraid that you'll have a hard time in the future by going against me? Bai Xiaowen chuckled and shook his head. If I don't kill you, I won't be able to complete my mission. The scavenger mission required him to destroy the Great Lord's consciousness connector. Now, it seemed that the Great Lord's consciousness connector was the humanoid octopus monster in front of him. Therefore, sealing it would not work. He had to be killed. The Great Lord gritted his teeth. He no longer tried to bewitch or threaten Bai Xiaowen. Instead, he focused on recovering his body. He only left behind a cold sneer. You want to kill me? Dream on. I'm immortal. Really? Bai Xiaowen laughed. Your Excellency, if I'm not wrong, your true form should be a heart-devouring demon, right? A deformed creature with an extremely high spiritual power. The Great Lord's expression changed. He sneered and said, what are you talking about? Don't compare such a lowly existence to me. Even if your true form isn't a heart-devouring demon, this carrier in front of us should have evolved from a heart-devouring demon, right? Bai Xiaowen said unhurriedly, actually, I can probably guess that the reason you can resurrect infinitely is related to Amitabha's brain. Every time you're killed, energy is extracted from Amitabha's brain. Perhaps Amitabha's brain medulla is extracted? The Great Lord stopped talking. Next to him, Ahan perked up. It's easy now that we know the principle. Although Amitabha's brain is huge, there will be a day when its energy is exhausted. We'll kill him thousands of times until Amitabha's brain medulla is exhausted. This guy can't resurrect infinitely, can he? Naive, the Great Lord said coldly. Bai Xiaowen waved his hand and said, actually, there's no need to go through so much trouble. As long as we can confirm that this guy evolved from a heart-devouring demon, it'll be easy. Your Majesty, please activate the teleportation magic array runes we reserved earlier. Queen Camelot nodded and took out a yellow dragon skin scroll. She unfolded it and pressed one hand on the inner page of the scroll. The sparkling magic light flickered and then quickly expanded into a circle about 3 meters in diameter. This teleportation rune is a one-time use. It's convenient to use, but it's a bit wasteful, Queen Camelot said with a smile. After the resonance of the teleportation rune on the other side is complete, it will teleport what you want. Thank you, Your Majesty, Bai Xiaowen said with a smile. A few seconds later, the resonance of the rune was complete. Splash! A huge water tank about 3 meters in diameter appeared out of thin air above the teleportation rune and slowly descended. In the water tank, there was a huge octopus monster. This was the heart-devouring demon aberrant state, that Bai Xiaowen obtained from the incubation pool under the altar when he first came to the Black Tide Plain and destroyed the first base of the Nagas. Note, this heart-devouring demon has failed to evolve. Its combat power is extremely weak. Killing it will not give you any loot treasure chests. Note, alchemists may be interested in it. It doesn't matter if the evolution failed. For the current situation, a failed product was better. If it was a heart-devouring demon leader that had successfully evolved, Bai Xiaowen would not be at ease. What do you want to do? The Great Lord instinctively felt that something was wrong. Bai Xiaowen laughed and said, of course I want to eat you. I'd like to see if you can come back to life after entering the stomach of this big guy. After a pause, Bai Xiaowen gestured. Master Roar, you can get to work. The Beast King Roar came to his senses and said with a smile, feeding pets, I'm best at this kind of work. He walked over with the meat cleaver. Don't come over. The Great Lord cried in horror. The Beast King Roar cut off one of the tentacle-like arms of the Great Lord and threw it into the water tank. The heart-devouring demon Aberrant, which was originally lazy, quickly became excited when the flesh and blood of the Great Lord fell into the pool. Many tentacles wrapped around the tentacle-like arm of the Great Lord. The tentacle-like arm shriveled at a speed visible to the naked eye. The Great Lord let out a scream. Strangely enough, the Great Lord could still feel the pain of the arm even though the devoured arm had clearly been separated from the body. This also confirmed another conjecture of Bai Xiaowen's. The heart-devouring demon was a kind of monster that mainly existed in the form of a spiritual being. The physical body was just an external medium for them. Therefore, it didn't matter if the Great Lord's body was cut open or even smashed into meat paste. This would not cause much damage to its spiritual consciousness. It could continuously replenish the spiritual energy that it had lost by extracting the energy from Amitabha's brain and then recover its physical body. The butcher could also gnaw on corpses. However, there was an essential difference between the butcher's eating and the heart-devouring demon's devouring. The butcher only ate the flesh and blood of the Great Lord, while the heart-devouring demon devoured the Great Lord's spiritual body. Chapter 1025. The heart-devouring aberrant body continued to devour. After a few screams, the Great Lord finally gave up on this plane completely. He cut off his consciousness and left the carrier. Before leaving, the Great Lord left some harsh words to Bai Xiaowen. Dior C. Kale Bloom. We will meet again soon. I look forward to that day. After that, the Great Lord's carrier lost the support of his consciousness and became an empty shell. Bai Xiaowen muttered in his heart. Although the Great Lord's last threat was just the barking of a defeated dog, it could not be ignored completely. The Great Lord's meaning should be that after Bai Xiaowen won this crucial battle, he had laid the foundation for the great unification of the Black Tide Plane. He would definitely be able to unify the plane in the future. After that, he could choose to advance and step into the world of the post-humans. And when he reached the world of the post-humans, would he encounter the Great Lord's true body? Bai Xiaowen shook his head slightly and stopped thinking about this matter. After the Great Lord's death, Amitabha's corpse also lost control. There was a rapid feeling of weightlessness, as if an elevator had lost control and was falling rapidly. This was caused by Amitabha's body falling to the ground. His huge head was at least a few thousand meters above the ground. It was not a trivial matter to fall to the ground. However, everyone present was a lord with powerful strength. They were also accompanied by a true master lord like Queen Camelo. A group slow descent spell was enough to save the 7 divine tool lords from death. We can go out through the nostrils of the central head, Bai Xiaowen said after they landed on the ground again. What about this big guy? Queen Camelo asked. She was referring to the heart-devouring aberrant body that had swallowed the remains of the Great Lord. This thing is just a product of a failed evolution. In theory, it can't cause any trouble. But to be safe, it's best to destroy it, Bai Xiaowen said. The other lords expressed their agreement. They had already figured out how the Great Lord descended. He used the heart-devouring aberrant body as a medium. Although this aberration had failed to evolve, even if there was a 1 in 10,000 chance, no one wanted the Great Lord to make a comeback. It was worth mentioning that the heart-devouring fiend aberration's spirit had risen to over 150 after devouring the Great Lord's remains. If it weren't for the fact that his stats were too low, he would have been a Lord-tier monster. Even though it was incomplete, its template evaluation had still been raised to the rare boss, enhanced boss, level. This was the result of Bai Xiaowen's insight. Killing such a mutant without any resistance was naturally effortless. However, Bai Xiaowen still sought the approval of everyone present and let the Wrath Claw be in charge of this matter. After all, it was a level 10 rare boss. It gave the Wrath Claw 2 points of spirit, which was better than nothing. Bai Xiaowen then summoned the butcher to eat the heart-devouring demon's corpse. The butcher's devour didn't give him any special effects. It only temporarily increased his maximum HP by 180 points. At this point, the last trace of the Great Lord's carrier in this world disappeared without a trace. Bai Xiaowen led the 6 holy artifact lords out of the nostrils of Amitabha's central head. This guy's nostrils were actually more than 10 meters in diameter, enough to accommodate 8 people side by side. It was truly terrifying. By the way, where's the core? Ahan suddenly asked. That's right. Dior the Prophet said that we need to get the core first before killing the Great Lord. Dorothea was a little anxious. Bai Xiaowen said with a smile, don't be nervous. I said that before to lure out the Snake Mother. Whether or not we kill the Great Lord, it won't affect us from getting the core. I've already locked onto the location of the 2 cores through mind vision. We can just go and get them. You can see the location of the core? You said before that the Great Lord put a mental shield on the 9 heads, so you can't use mind vision. Was that a lie? Queen Camelo asked. Bai Xiaowen nodded. Originally, the Great Lord's mental shield was effective against me. But after receiving the buff from Holy Aggregation, my mind vision can break through the Great Lord's shield. At the end of the day, this was the magical effect of Priority +2. The 7 sacred tool lords had returned to the battlefield, and at this time, the battle had already shown a one-sided situation. There was no other reason than the fact that the Snake People army knew something was wrong when they saw Amitabha's mountain-like body collapse with a loud crash. After losing their backbone and the Great Lord's divine halo, the Snake People no longer had any desire to fight or the ability to resist, and they all fled in disorder. The various leaders of the Allied forces naturally chased after the cornered enemy, continuously killing and capturing the Snake People soldiers who had lost their will to fight. The return of the 7 holy artifact lords was the last straw that broke the camel's back. This battle ended quickly, and the 7 holy artifact lords were surrounded by the Allied soldiers. Victory! 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 The 7 holy artifact lords could feel the reverence and excitement in the eyes of the Allied soldiers, and a sense of pride arose spontaneously. At this moment, there was no longer any barriers between countries or races. Even the orcs and elves, who had always been enemies, put aside their racial animosity and rejoiced in this hard-won victory. The 7 holy artifacts suddenly glowed, and then became scorching hot. Under the astonished gazes of the 7 holy artifact lords, the 7 holy artifacts slowly floated into the air and formed a circle. What's going on? I feel like I've lost my connection with the holy artifacts, Queen Camelo said in astonishment. The buff from Holy Aggregation had disappeared from the 7 holy artifact lords. Bai Xiaowen had the same feeling. He quickly guessed the reason. Looks like the holy artifacts have completed their mission. Bai Xiaowen said something that was in line with his charlatan persona. From the perspective of the spiritual realm's rules, it had created the 7 holy artifacts and selected 7 people to become holy artifact lords with the goal of fighting against the Great Lord. Forcefully increasing the strength of the spiritual realm's people, especially the holy aggregation that increased the basic priority by 2 points, would definitely consume a large amount of resources. After the Great Lord was eliminated, the mystical power contained in the 7 holy artifacts would naturally be reclaimed by the spiritual realm's rules. A blurry silhouette appeared on each of the saint artifacts. Oh my God, the sun god Apollo! Dorothea muttered when she saw the blurry shadow above the light longbow, Apollo's whispers. Although she could not clearly see the face of the shadow, who could appear from the holy artifact, Apollo's whispers, if it was not the sun god, who else could it be? The tyrant god, Balgra. The god of justice, Valen. The god of magic, Azuz. Exclamations of surprise came not only from the 7 holy artifact lords, but also from the surrounding onlookers. No one could clearly see the face of the shadow, and they could only judge from the corresponding holy artifact. You're tuning into the Mythic Realms YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.